The anime begins in a mountain village that has been suffering from constant attacks by an S-rank Fenrir. Consequently, the villagers spent all of their savings to hire an SS-rank party to defeat the beast. The members of the Blazing Dragon Fang are among the strongest adventurers in the world, each possessing their own unique abilities. However, there is Kurt, and the only thing he is proficient at is completing chores. For this reason, he is hiding behind a wall to avoid being injured. Nevertheless, Kurt is the first person the Fenrir attacks as soon as it arrives, so he is thrown aside while the other members of the group prepare for combat. Golov orders Bandana to restrain the Fenrir, so she pulls her wire and binds it. But in the blink of an eye, the Fenrir breaks her back against a wall. Normally, Bandana would be confined to a wheelchair for the rest of her life. Yet with Marlis on the team, she is healed in seconds and returns to the task. She uses a tree to anchor herself to the ground, providing Golov with an opening to aim at the head of the Fenrir, and then he leaps and sets it on fire with his magic sword. The villagers are so happy with the defeat of the Fenrir that they prepare a banquet for the group, even though the village is almost completely out of money. However, Golov utterly loathes this peasant food, so he orders Kurt to prepare a decent meal for him instead. Bandana asks him to make something special because today is the last day they will be able to eat the food prepared by Kurt. Kurt does not understand what they mean by that, so he asks Golov for an explanation. And he tells Kurt that as of today, he is being fired. Kurt does not understand why they are firing him, so he asks Golov if he did something wrong. But Golov says the problem is that Kurt is not doing enough. Certainly, he takes care of the group's chores for them, but other than that, he is completely useless in combat, and parties can only have 4 members. Therefore, if they want the group to truly become stronger, they need to replace Kurt with a powerful mage, or at least someone who can hold their own in a fight. Kurt begs them to let him stay in the group, but Golov kicks him in the stomach because he is tired of hearing Kurt's complaints. They do not need him anymore, and that is final. The following day, Kurt leaves the village alone, with nowhere to go and without a single coin in his pocket. Kurt eventually reaches the city of Sar and is down to his last coins, so he truly needs to find a new job soon. He finds a temporary employment agency and decides to enter. When he enters, he is greeted by the receptionist. She asks if he is there to hire someone or to look for a job, and after Kurt tells her that he is looking for work, she informs him that he will need to undergo an interview and an aptitude test. First, she asks for basic details such as name, age, and hometown, so he tells her that his name is Kurt Hawkins. He is 15 years old and is from Heist Village in the Shin Mountain. Kiryu had no idea there was a village in those mountains, but moving forward, she asks what his work history was like. Kurt tells her that he was part of the Blazing Dragon Fang, but all he did for them were basic chores, and he was recently fired. Kiryu is surprised to learn that Kurt was part of an S-rank group, and even though he did not do much for them, having the name of the group on his application will definitely help in finding a new job. Kurt is happy to hear this, and now all he needs to do is complete the aptitude test so that Kiryu can discover what his strengths and weaknesses are. Aptitudes in this world are gifts granted by God, and if Kurt is lucky, he might discover a hidden talent today. Aptitudes are ranked from G rank to SSS rank, and the difference between the aptitude ranks is so great that someone with a G rank sword skill could barely swing a sword, while someone with an A rank sword skill could split a rock in half without effort. Kurt is excited to find out if he has any talent, but unfortunately, all the combat aptitudes on his sheet are ranked as G rank, so he has no hope of taking on a combat role. Kurt loses all hope immediately, but Kiryu tells him there is still a chance he has a good labor skill, such as alchemy or blacksmithing. However, the technician who handles those aptitude tests is currently on vacation, and Kurt will have to return next week to be evaluated. Kurt tells her that he will not last that long because he has no money in his pocket, so he really needs to find a job today. Kiryu understands Kurt's situation, so she asks him to try lifting one of those sandbags over there. Kurt tries, and when he places his hands on the bag, he feels a strange sensation, almost as if the sand were draining a bit of his mana. Regardless, he manages to lift the bag, and since he is strong enough to do so, Kiryu believes he should be capable of handling construction work. She informs him that Margara Vardi of Tianis is currently recruiting workers to assist in repairing the city walls, so Kurt should be able to secure employment if she writes a letter of recommendation for him. Kurt is grateful for her assistance and immediately goes to meet Margara Vardi. When he arrives, Margara reads the letter stating that Kurt wishes to work there. but he honestly does not think Kurt appears capable of handling construction labor. On the other hand, he needs all the help he can get, so he decides to give Kurt a chance. He instructs him to mix some cement and use it to repair the wall, and his payment will be determined by the amount of work he completes. Margara says he will return later to check on Kurt's progress and warns him that he had better start right away. If he has not used at least half a barrel of cement by the time he returns, the payment will be very low. Kurt wants to ask a question because Margara never mentioned anything about pouring mana into the cement to strengthen it, but he decides to remain silent, assuming it is likely common knowledge. Nevertheless, he is surprised that the goal is only half a barrel of cement, as that seems far too easy. Therefore, Kurt decides to use as much cement as he can before Margara returns. When Margara does return, he is shocked to see that Kurt has already finished an entire section of the wall. Kurt apologizes, explaining that he could have done more but ran out of cement in the middle of the task. Margara still finds it difficult to believe. Kurt has actually repaired more than a third of the massive west wall, so he asks Kurt how he managed to repair the top of the wall. Kurt explains that he simply threw the cement up there and used his stick to smooth it out. Normally, Margara would call Kurt a liar because that seems impossible, but Kurt clearly managed to make it work. Therefore, he must be telling the truth. He asks Kurt how long he intends to work there, and Kurt says he only needs the job for a week, which Margara is happy to hear. He tells Kurt that he has worked enough for today and can go home. He does not have enough money on hand to pay Kurt for all the work he has done, so he hands him a small pouch of money and promises to send the remainder through the temporary employment agency. Kurt is impressed because even the small pouch contains more money than he could ever earn while working for the hero's party. Over the following days, Kurt continues to work hard on the wall repairs, but suddenly Margara tells him that he is being fired. Kurt asks for the reason, and Margara explains that the wall repairs were intended to provide work for people in poverty. But Kurt is far too efficient. If he continues working there, there will be no work left for anyone else. He is not angry with Kurt. In fact, based on what he has seen, Kurt's skill is at least double S rank, if not triple S rank, so he would be better off working in the royal capital or somewhere similar. He gives Kurt a one-time payment as compensation for firing him so suddenly, and then departs. However, Kurt completely misunderstands the situation and believes Margara simply wanted to get rid of him for being a terrible worker. He returns to the temporary employment agency and finds Kityu to tell her that he was fired and that it will still be a few days until his work attributes can be evaluated. At that moment, they hear a commotion at the reception desk. It appears a girl is trying to post a recruitment advertisement, but the receptionist says that no one would agree to work under such poor conditions with what she is offering. Even so, the girl continues to insist that the receptionist try to find someone, and she begins to cause an uproar. Kityu goes to see what the problem is. Kityu's colleague says the girl wants to recruit a miner to excavate a mountain that has not yet been explored, but she refuses to offer any advance payment and insists on paying only if the excavation is successful. Kityu agrees that no one in their right mind would accept these terms, so she tries to convince the girl to seek investors to develop the mine. However, the girl says she cannot do that because if she does not pay her taxes by the end of the week, her mine will be confiscated. At that moment, Kurt approaches and says he is crazy enough to accept a job like that. After all, in his village, he used to help with mine excavation, so he has a good amount of experience. Kityu asks Kurt if he is certain he wants to accept, because under the contract the girl is offering, it is entirely possible that he will receive nothing. Before Kurt can answer, the girl interrupts him, stating that she had actually hoped to hire a strong dwarf, rather than a little boy who appears defenseless, so she would feel guilty making Kurt work on this task. However, any dwarf would demand an advance payment of at least 10 silver coins, and the girl does not have that much money available. Therefore, she decides to hire Kurt anyway. As Kurt and the girl depart, Kityu feels uneasy about letting him accept this job, as it is likely not worth the effort. Honestly, she thinks Kurt would be better off working in a brothel, because she would spend her entire salary just to spend one night with him. While she is daydreaming about Kurt, her colleague catches her attention, mentioning that a bank transfer has just arrived. Apparently, it is the remainder of the money Margara promised to send. It is the compensation for all the work Kurt performed on the wall. Kityu expected it to be something like 50 silver coins, but it is actually a check for 200 gold coins, which is an immense amount of money. She is so shocked that Kurt actually managed to earn that much money that she ends up tripping over the sandbags on the floor. Her colleague approaches, telling her to be careful with them because they are not ordinary sandbags. In fact, they are used to measure the amount of mana a person possesses, and they are supposed to become heavier when someone with a large mana reserve touches them. They generally do not react to common people, so Kiryu is able to lift them quite easily. However, she remembers seeing Kurt having great difficulty when he tried to lift them a few days ago, so she begins to wonder if he truly is just an ordinary boy. Meanwhile, Kurt and Ulisha are walking through the forest to reach her camp. But when they arrive, Kurt becomes a bit concerned because there is only one tent. Uli says the tent is large enough for both of them to sleep close together. But Kurt says he could never sleep while being next to a girl as beautiful as she is. Upon hearing Kurt call her beautiful, Ulisha becomes irritated because she thinks he is merely trying to flatter her. But Kurt says he truly believes Ulisha is beautiful. Ulisha realizes that Kurt spoke sincerely, so she relaxes and hands him a potato for dinner. It is just a simple boiled potato, but it has been a long time since anyone cooked for Kurt, so he truly appreciates it. He is also grateful for the fact that Ulisha is sitting with him to eat, because Golov and the others from the hero's party always refuse to let Kurt eat in the same place as them. Later that night, Kurt and Ulisha go to sleep, but Kurt has difficulty falling asleep because Ulisha went to sleep in her underwear. He could never sleep that way, so he decides to leave the tent during the night and sleep outside. As soon as Kurt leaves the tent, Ulisha opens her eyes because she was only pretending to sleep. She went to sleep in her underwear on purpose to see if Kurt was the type of person who would attack her while she slept, but now she knows he is a good person. Furthermore, she finds him quite handsome and fun to tease. The next morning, Ulisha wakes up and exits the tent. She finds Kurt sleeping near a tree and feels a bit bad for making him sleep out there, but then she notices that her jacket has been repaired. When Kurt wakes up, she asks if it was he who repaired her jacket, and he confirms it. She is impressed that he has such a talent for sewing and begins to wonder if he will actually be good at mining. But it is too late to find someone else, so it is better for them to start working. Kurt asks Ulisha if she has already decided on a place to begin mining, but she was simply going to dig in random locations and hope to find some valuable ore. Kurt says she will never find anything searching that way, and, as it happens, he knows a much more efficient method. He leads Ulisha to a part of the mountain and, after observing for a bit, finds a rock full of gemstones. Ulisha is shocked that he found it so easily. But in a matter of minutes, Kurt locates all the gemstones in that part of the mountain. Ulisha can hardly believe it because if she sells all these gems, she will be able to pay off her debt. However, Kurt says she cannot sell them. Ulisha realizes he is right, since it was Kurt who found all of them, so he should keep the money. But that was not what he meant. He was only trying to tell her that the gems would be more valuable if he transformed them into magic crystals first. Kurt is correct about this, but Ulisha says there are only 10 mages in the entire kingdom who are skilled enough to transform gems into magic crystals. Yet while she was saying this, Kurt simply finished transforming a gem into a magic crystal. Ulisha is too shocked to speak because not only did Kurt create a magic crystal, but also did so instantaneously, whereas even the most experienced mages require at least an hour to produce a single magic crystal. After Kurt finishes transforming all the gems into crystals, he agrees to let Ulisha go sell them. She departs while he remains on the mountain, as there are still several things he wishes to complete first. Ulisha goes to the city's customs agency and states that she wants to sell some magic crystals in the royal capital. However, crystals are incredibly valuable, so the agent inquires where she obtained them. There is no way he would believe her if she said a random boy created them, so she shows her royal family emblem to make him stop asking questions. This is a complete fabrication, as she stopped working for the royal family some time ago and they simply forgot to take back her emblem. Nevertheless, it works, and the customs agent allows her to use the teleportation circle to travel to the capital. Once she arrives, she goes to the shop of an old friend and tells Mimiko that she has some magic gems to sell. Mimiko takes a look at them, and at first, they do not seem to be worth much, but upon closer examination, she discovers they possess 10 times the normal amount of imbued mana. Consequently, these crystals are worth 10 gold coins each. Ulisha is speechless because Kurt gave her 50 of them, and Mimiko casually hands her a bag containing 500 gold coins. But before Ulisha leaves, Mimiko makes 2 requests. First, she wants Ulisha to promise to sell crystals like these only at that shop. because it would be a disaster if such powerful crystals circulated without regulation. Secondly, she wants to know the name of the person who created the crystals. Ulisha agrees to the first condition, but says she cannot tell Mimiko the name of the creator because she would have to ask his permission first. Mimiko is a mage of the royal family, so she tries to use her position to order Ulisha to reveal the information about the mysterious mage. However, Ulisha no longer works for the royal family, and is therefore not obligated to obey Mimiko. Mimiko realizes she will not be able to convince Ulisha to reveal Kurt's information, so she at least asks her to ensure that he does not leave for another nation. She also wants Ulisha to tell him that if he accepts a position working for the royal family, Mimiko is prepared to grant him the title of Count and full access to the Royal Research Laboratory, along with all its benefits. Ulisha then leaves Mimiko's shop and returns to the mountain the next morning to find Kurt. But she is shocked to discover that Kurt has built an entire house in the time she was away. Putting that aside, Ulisha explains that a friend wants to hire him as a royal mage. If he accepts the position, he will be treated as a noble, and will have a guaranteed high salary with benefits. Regardless of the circumstances, Kurt finds it difficult to believe he is truly being offered such an impressive job. However, Ulisha assures him it is a genuine offer. She asks what he wants to do, but Kurt says he will decline. Ulisha cannot believe Kurt would refuse, because anyone would accept the chance to become a royal mage. Furthermore, it is shocking because Kurt's reason for refusing is quite silly. He believes he does not deserve to be in a position that places him above other people, and he still hopes to return to his handyman role with the Blazing Dragon Fang, even if he has to beg them to let him back in. Speaking of the Blazing Dragon Fang, they are currently being badly beaten by a tree monster. Golov is unable to use his fire magic for some reason, so he asks Marlis to heal him. She has been trying to do so for a while, but her healing magic is not functioning as it normally does. Golov asks the newcomer to cast some fire magic to defeat the tree, but the newcomer does not know how to use fire magic, which was supposed to be Golov's job. In any case, the group's chemistry has completely vanished. Without Kurt there, they have become disjointed, and Bandana is the only one who can perceive that the group is falling apart. Returning to Kurt, his current job is still helping Ulisha mine gems, and he mentions that he found a good vein of gems yesterday, so he can obtain many more for her. Ulisha is grateful for his enthusiasm, but is concerned that Kurt might be tired from all the work he did yesterday. However, he tells her not to worry because he slept for 6 hours last night. Ulisha is shocked to hear this and begins to do the math mentally to understand how Kurt managed to build an entire house and still sleep for 6 hours. Kurt interprets this as Ulisha being angry because he overslept, so he apologizes and says he will make up for his laziness. Ulisha truly needs to explain Kurt's strength to him at some point, but she has no idea how to approach the subject, so she and Kurt simply head out to mine more gems. Kurt leads Ulisha to the location he found, and even though it looks like an ordinary part of the forest, Kurt says she should be able to find good gems there. However, he warns her not to dig deeper than 500 meters, as if that were something anyone could do by accident. He then begins to walk away, and when Ulisha asks where he is going, Kurt explains that he is heading to another mining spot and will meet her later. Ulisha spends the entire day digging, and as night falls, she finally finds a massive topaz gem. She deposited all the gold coins obtained from the magic crystals into Kurt's account because he was the one who found them. However, since she found this topaz on her own, she can use the profit to pay her taxes. She could likely even convince Kurt to transform it into a magic gem to earn even more money. But she decides not to do so because she does not want to take advantage of Kurt's kindness. Speaking of Kurt, she decides to see how he is doing. Based on what she had seen him do so far, she knew he would overdo it. But she did not expect him to have constructed an entire system of tunnels in 8 hours. Eventually, Kurt emerges and tells Ulisha that, unfortunately, he only managed to find a little of the gem he was looking for. Everything else he found was just a pile of useless rocks, so he plans to throw them away once he is finished there. Ulisha looks inside the cart of rocks, and those stones look far too beautiful to be useless, so she asks what they are. Kurt explains that they are mithril ores, but in Kurt's village, mithril was so common in the mines that they usually threw it away when they found it. Ulisha is speechless at what she has just heard. Besides wanting to know what kind of village Kurt came from, she asks what gem he was searching for, since he considers mithril to be trash. Kurt pulls out a small stone and says he was looking for orichalcum. but he only managed to find enough to fill a small box. Orichalcum is known as the metal of the gods, so even a grain of it is worth millions, and Kurt simply found a box of it, as if it were nothing. Ulisha had no idea that orichalcum could be found in such places, but Kurt says that minerals can potentially be found anywhere. One simply has to dig 8 kilometers underground to reach them. Ulisha decides that this is enough mining for today, and since the topaz she found will cover her taxes, her contract with Kurt comes to an end. This means Kurt needs to start looking for another job, because no one has told him yet about the mountain of gold in his bank account. While on his way to the agency, Kurt encounters Bandana and is happy to see her, but he asks what she is doing there. Bandana says she is no longer part of the Blazing Dragon Fang, but there is a bit more to the story. After the disastrous mission, Golov went to a 5-star restaurant to eat something good, but compared to Kurt's cooking, everything there tasted like trash. Golov became furious, destroyed the place, and left without paying. Upon entering an alley, he finds Bandana, and she tells him he went too far by destroying that restaurant. However, all Golov cares about is getting good food, so he orders Bandana to find Kurt and force him to return, even if she has to break his bones to do so. Golov is clearly losing his sanity, so Bandana does not argue with him about it. She simply takes Golov's teleportation crystal and runs out of the alley. As she leaves, she sees the city guards approaching Golov's location, and without that teleportation crystal, he will definitely be arrested for what he did at the restaurant. Furthermore, Marlis was called to the church, so the Blazing Dragon Fang group is officially finished. However, she leaves out most of the details regarding Golov having completely snapped. Kurt is disappointed to learn that the group has disbanded because it means he can no longer return. But Bandana does not understand why he would want to go back in the first place. Kurt explains that he owes a lot to Golov, still not realizing what an idiot Golov was, so he is very sad that he can no longer work with him. Bandana, on the other hand, never cared much for Golov, as he was merely a front so that she could keep an eye on Kurt. In any case, since Kurt was heading to the agency, Bandana presumes he is looking for a job, and if that is the case, she has the perfect opportunity for him. A friend of hers has been looking for someone to help in her workshop lately, and it should be a good job since this friend is an 8-Leer Meister. There are only a few 8-Leer Meisters in the world, and they are all extremely important, with influence comparable to that of a Viscount. Bandana asks Kurt if he wants to accept the job, and he says he would love to, so she hands him the map and sends him on his way. So Kurt finally arrives at the 8-Leer Meister's workshop, but he is slightly confused, as the place appears to be an ordinary house to him. He knocks on the door and a small elf girl answers. Initially, Kurt is somewhat surprised because he did not expect the 8-Leer Meister to be a young girl, but Michelle explains that she is actually the Meister's assistant. In that case, Kurt tells her that he is there for work, and Michelle is delighted to hear this because she needs all the help she can get. She leads Kurt to the kitchen, and as soon as he steps inside, he detects a horrific smell. Michelle apologizes for the mess, explaining that the Meister has been making her work non-stop, so she has not yet had a chance to clean everything properly. At that moment, the Meister calls for Michelle, so she runs off and asks Kurt to help her clean the kitchen. Kurt is a bit disappointed, as he thought he would be assisting the 8-Leer Meister, but domestic chores are simple enough for him, so he begins to work. Half an hour later, Kurt has already cleaned the entire kitchen. Since Michelle did not specify what he should do next, he begins to wander through the hallways looking for her. He finds a door in one of the corridors, knocks, and a girl inside tells him to enter. However, when Kurt enters, he sees the girl practically naked on the bed. He is embarrassed and apologizes for the intrusion, but she does not seem bothered by him seeing her that way. Kurt explains that he is looking for Michelle, and the girl informs him that Michelle is in the basement. Kurt is about to leave to find her, but then he notices a dark mark on the girl's stomach. Kurt recognizes it as a curse, so he asks if he can take a closer look. She grants permission, so Kurt approaches and begins to examine the cursed area. Curses like this generally destroy the internal organs surrounding the affected area, so it must be extremely difficult for the girl to eat. However, it appears her stomach is still intact, so Kurt offers to prepare some food for her. Meanwhile, Ulisha meets with Mimiko. The two discuss the mithril and orichalcum that Kurt found. Kurt did not even transform them into magic crystals this time, yet the value still exceeds 50,000 gold coins, so Ulisha begins to grow concerned. She asks Mimiko what she thinks will happen if people discover Kurt's ability. In the best case scenario, Kurt will be kidnapped and forced into slavery. In the worst-case scenario, he will be assassinated for being too great a threat. Mimiko asks Ulisha what she plans to do with Kurt. And so far, Ulisha has thought about preparing him to become an 8-Leer Meister himself. That way, he would have enough power so that no one could take advantage of him, and she plans to work as his bodyguard. However, making Kurt agree to all of this will be difficult. He is too naive to realize how skilled he truly is. And even worse, he constantly underestimates himself. So Ulisha needs to act before Kurt ends up in trouble. Meanwhile, Kurt has just finished cooking porridge for the girl he met earlier, when suddenly Michelle and the 8-Leer Meister emerge from the basement. The two are surprised to see that the kitchen is no longer a biohazard, and even more so to realize that Kurt cleaned it in such a short time. The Meister, Alicia, notices that Kurt is preparing porridge, so Kurt explains that the girl he found in one of the rooms said she was hungry. Alicia seems a bit worried that Kurt found that girl, so she makes him promise not to tell anyone about her. Kurt promises, so Alicia says he can go home for today and hands him 3 silver coins. Kurt is surprised she is paying so much just for cleaning the kitchen, but she says he deserves it for working so hard and asks him to return tomorrow. A bit later, Alicia goes to the girl's room with the porridge Kurt made for her and reminds her that she must not let other people see her. Other than that, Kurt does not seem like a threat, so Alicia does not think she will need to worry about him revealing the secret. Lai has not eaten yet, so Alicia asks her to wait a minute while she tests the porridge for poison. However, Lai says there is no need for that. She spoke with Kurt for only a short time, but her intuition tells her he is a good person. Furthermore, there would be no point in trying to poison her when the curse has already advanced so far. She has had to live her life suspecting everyone around her. So, just this once, she wants to trust someone completely. Alicia understands and lets her eat the porridge. But after she takes the first spoonful, she begins to sweat profusely and collapses onto the floor. Consequently, Alicia thinks that Kurt truly did poison the food. She is about to initiate a hunt to kill him. But suddenly Lai stands up and says she is fine. In reality, she feels better than ever because the curse has just been broken. Lai has no idea how to process what just happened, as a curse of that magnitude is not easily undone. Nevertheless, it was undoubtedly broken by the food that Kurt prepared. Meanwhile, the secret organization that placed the curse on Lai is holding a meeting because they have just discovered that the curse has been lifted. They had hoped to use it to safely kill Lai from a distance, but now they will have to resort to more drastic measures. Later that night, Alicia and Lai go to Mimiko's shop because they have something urgent to discuss. Lai removes her hood, and as soon as Mimiko and Alicia see her face, they recognize her as the 3rd princess of the nation. Alicia explains that a powerful curse was placed on Lai in an attempt to assassinate her. They are not certain who is behind it, but Lai is the only daughter of the king and Princess Fran of the Gurumako kingdom. Thus, her existence serves as a symbol of peace between the two nations. Clearly, someone is attempting to incite a war. Mimiko is happy that Lai is well, but is surprised that she managed to break such a powerful curse on her own. However, Lai says she was not alone. The curse was actually broken by a man named Kurt, and as soon as the two hear Kurt's name, they are shocked. Alicia is still having difficulty believing it. The curse that had been tormenting Lai for years was broken by a bowl of porridge. At this point, she already knows that Kurt can do absurd things, but she literally left him alone for half a day, and he ended up saving the princess. They intend to reward Kurt for his help eventually, but before that, Mimiko believes it is important for them to find the person responsible for the curse. Generally, there are anti-curse spells in Lai's room, so someone must have tampered with them before she was cursed. There are only 3 people in the kingdom who had access to Lai's room at that time: Sonova Hisgate, the general of the Royal Expeditionary Force, Tristama Ino, the bishop of the church, and Isadora, the 3rd queen of the realm. However, they cannot go around making false accusations, so they will need to obtain concrete evidence before taking action. Alicia suggests that they set a trap to lure the culprit out. She already has a perfect plan in mind. Lai has recently turned 15, and royal customs dictate that she must leave home and train for a year. The people behind the assassination attempt will certainly try to reach her again. Therefore, Alicia plans to create a fake 8-Leer Meister and claim that Lai was sent there to train. The assassins will likely try to obtain information about the 8-Leer Meister to plan an attack, and when they do, they will fall straight into Alicia's trap. However, they will need to find someone with significant achievements to become the fake 8-Leer Meister. Alicia has the perfect person in mind. She shows Alicia one of the magic crystals Kurt made, and as soon as Alicia sees it, She has no doubt it is the highest quality crystal she has ever seen. Speaking of Kurt, the next day he returns to Alicia's house for work. But when he arrives, he finds a note on the door stating she is out. He then finds Michelle and asks what is happening. Michelle explains that after he left yesterday, Alicia suddenly departed with Lai, and they have not yet returned. Unfortunately, this means there is no work for Kurt today, so he leaves the house disappointed and goes to the guild to eat. While eating, he overhears a group at the next table. They are in a panic because their porter has fallen ill, and without him, they will not be able to handle their next mission. Kurt thinks about it and is certain he can do the work of a porter, so he goes to their table and introduces himself, mentioning that he overheard their conversation. Although he is terrible at combat, he is confident he can be useful to the team as a porter. Estina mocks the idea of Kurt becoming their porter, because a thin boy like him could never handle such heavy work. Ken slaps her on the head and apologizes to Kurt for his sister's rude behavior, but he also does not believe Kurt could do the job. It is a very physically demanding task, especially since the group is hunting golems that weigh over 200 kilograms. However, Kurt says he can carry 200 kilograms easily. In fact, to prove it, he lifts both of them on the spot, making it seem effortless. Even with Ken wearing over 150 kilograms of armor, Kurt definitely proves he is capable. So the group agrees to hire him as a porter. While they are on their way to the mission site, everyone introduces themselves properly to Kurt. Ken is the group's heavy warrior, but even though he carries a sword, he generally prefers to fight with his fists. Meanwhile, Danzo is a samurai, and Estina is an archer. They also have another teammate, but he is ill with a cold. Therefore, they had to hire Kurt to replace him for today. They say they are happy to have him on the team, and Kurt thanks them for giving a chance to an incompetent nobody like himself. They do not understand what he is talking about, as an incompetent person would not be able to lift 400 kilograms as if it were a warm-up. But they consider it merely Kurt's sense of humor. The group continues walking, but suddenly Kurt screams because he has just been attacked. They all immediately turn to save him, but are confused when they see him struggling against a slime. Kurt is truly in a panic, but Estina tells him to calm down, because all he needs to do is destroy the slime's core to kill it. Kurt tries to follow the advice, but when he attempts to pierce the slime's core, his knife simply cannot penetrate it, and somehow he ends up stabbing himself instead. Clearly, Kurt will not be able to kill it alone, so Estina takes care of the slime for him. But she is surprised by how poor Kurt's attacking skills are. He mentioned that his combat ability is almost zero, but she did not imagine it would be quite that bad. Kurt apologizes for being so useless, but everyone tells him he does not need to worry about it, because his job as a porter is to transport the mission items, so he can leave all the fighting to them. Kurt can hardly believe what he is hearing. He has just failed miserably. Yet his teammates are not angry with him. This is nothing like the way he was treated when he was with the blazing dragon Fang, so he is happy to have found such kind companions. Eventually, they reach the cave, but it is quite dark, so Estina spreads some glowing moss around to illuminate the environment. When the cave is lit, Kurt notices some droppings on a rock, so he asks Estina if they should be concerned. Estina tells him the droppings are from goblins and, considering how fresh they are, there is likely a goblin nest somewhere in that cave. Kurt panics slightly, since if he cannot kill a slime, there is no way he can defeat a goblin. But Ken says there is no need to worry, as the rest of them can handle a few goblin. However, if they encounter a goblin horde, they would have no chance at all, so they must avoid that at all costs. They continue moving deeper into the cave and arrive at some ruins. While walking, Kurt notices something strange on the wall. At that moment, Estina spots a goblin and tries to kill it as quickly as possible. But it is already too late. The goblin had already called for reinforcements, and now they can hear a massive horde of goblins approaching from both the front and the back. The reports did not mention there would be so many goblins there, and now they have nowhere to run. Estina turns to Danzo to ask if he has a plan, but given the situation, the only thing they can do is prepare for a brutal death. Kurt tells everyone that he found a secret passage in the wall. This is excellent news, but even with the passage, they will not be able to outrun the goblins, so they need a distraction. Danzo and Ken signal Estina, and she understands what they are asking her to do, so she takes Kurt into the secret room and closes the door behind him. Kurt does not understand why she did this, since Danzo and Ken are still on the other side of the door. But that was exactly what they wanted. Ken tells Kurt that the goblins will pursue all of them if they flee together. so he and Danzo will try to lure them away to give Kurt and Estina a chance to escape. Kurt does not want to leave them behind, but Estina says they cannot go back. She also does not want to abandon her companions, but Kurt has no combat skills and Estina's fighting abilities are average at best, so they would only hinder the two of them. Furthermore, she says she is certain that Danzo and Ken will find some way to survive. But that was pure delusional consolation, because Danzo and Ken know they are going to die there. Still, they do not regret the decision, because dying while protecting their friends is the greatest honor a warrior could have. Estina tells Kurt they need to move, so she spreads some glowing moss around the area to search for an exit. To her horror, she discovers that this is not an ordinary secret room. It is a boss room, and now they are trapped inside with an iron dragon. Meanwhile, back in the city, Lai wants to find Kurt again, so she asks Ulisha to take her to his lodgings. After Ulisha picks the lock, she and Lai enter Kurt's room, but to their surprise, he is not there. Suddenly, they hear a voice saying that if they are looking for Kurt, he went on a mission to the northeast caves. Ulisha has no idea who is speaking, so she rushes out of the room to confront this person. However, by the time she gets outside, Ben has already vanished. She is confused by what just happened, but Kurt really is in the northeast caves and could be in serious trouble. From what Ulisha knows, a training program for hunting goblins was recently conducted near those caves, so some surviving goblins might have established a nest in that cave. Ulisha tells Lai to wait for her because she is going to help Kurt, but Lai says she wants to go as well. Ulisha does not think it is a good idea, as taking a princess into a cave full of monsters is not exactly safe. But Lai has been training her magic since she was a child, so she is confident she can defend herself. Furthermore, Ulisha is supposed to be protecting her, so it would be unwise to leave her alone. Ulisha eventually agrees to take her along, so the two head to the cave, and by the fresh glowing moss on the walls, they can tell that someone was there recently. Lai casts a sensory enhancement spell on herself, and Ulisha thinks she is going to try to hear signs of Kurt. But Lai kneels and begins to sniff for him. She was near him for 10 minutes at most, but that was enough to memorize his scent. And after sniffing a bit more, she finds Kurt's trail. She also hears a fight happening down that corridor, so she warns Ulisha and grants her a status boost so she can help. Danzo and Ken have been fighting quite well against the goblins for a while, but at this pace, they will not hold out much longer. Fortunately, before any of them could be mortally wounded, Ulisha rushes in and cuts down all the goblins with a single strike. Meanwhile, inside the secret room, Estina falls to her knees in defeat because there is no way she can fight a dragon golem. She apologizes to Kurt for dragging him into this mess, because now both of them are going to die there. But Kurt says there is nothing to worry about because he has dealt with many of these before. He begins walking toward the dragon, and the moment he is about to hit it, he leaps into the air and lands on its tail. Kurt then uses his dagger and, with a light touch, completely severs the dragon's tail. He does the same with all the dragon's limbs, and Estina can hardly believe that the guy who could not kill a slime is defeating a dragon with such ease. She is honestly a bit frightened at this point, but Kurt does not understand why, as mining golems is normal for him. At that moment, Ulisha rushes into the secret room to see if Kurt is okay and finds him in front of a pile of dragon golem parts. Kurt is happy to see her and asks her to save his friends because Danzo and Ken might still be in danger. But Ulisha says she has already saved them both, and that although they are a bit injured, they will be fine. And now that everyone is safe, they gather in the secret room to discuss a few things. First, Ken and Danzo thank Ulisha for saving them, as they would have died without her help. But Ulisha says they do not need to worry about it. More importantly, she has something to say to Kurt. And so while she carries some parts of the dragon, she informs him that she is opening a new atelier. She asks if he would like to be a part of it. But Kurt thinks he cannot, as he is currently working as part of that group. However, Ken says he does not need to worry about the group. Ulisha's offer is a great opportunity, so he encourages Kurt to accept it. And since Ken and the others are in agreement, Kurt accepts the proposal. Ulisha also mentions that she needs to hire some adventurers to protect the atelier shop, so she asks Ken and the others if they would be willing to take on that role, and they say they would love to. Since this is great news, Ken proposes that they have a party when they return to the city. And speaking of the city, Ulisha reminds Kurt to have his skills evaluated when he returns to the agency because she found someone to conduct that evaluation for him. A few hours later, Kurt arrives at the agency and is introduced to Mimiko. She says she is a royal mage and that she has heard a lot about his impressive abilities, so she is there to evaluate his non-combat skills. When the evaluation ends, Mimiko tells Kurt that all of his non-combat skills are B rank, but that was a complete lie. According to the reading she took, all of Kurt's skills are SSS rank, and his latent potential is greater than anything she has ever seen before. She is glad she was the one who performed the aptitude test, because it would be a national disaster if anyone discovered how strong Kurt really is. In fact, they would likely have to kill any witnesses on the spot, which is terrible news for Kiryu. Since she ended up overhearing everything, the group heads immediately to the city the following day, where the Atelier will be established. However, Ulisha never specified who the new Atelier Meister would be, so everyone is excited to meet this person. Ulisha cannot tell the truth either, so she begins making up excuses on the fly. By this point, Estina has already realized that Ulisha did not hire their group out of kindness, and she began acting strangely when Ken asked about the Atelier Meister. Consequently, Estina is becoming very suspicious. As they approach the city, Kurt notices it is the same city where he built that wall, and he still believes Margara fired him for being a poor worker, so he feels bad about being there again. Ulisha finally leads everyone to the site of the new Atelier, but calling it a workshop makes no sense, because it is clearly a vacant lot. Ken says he cannot do anything with an empty lot, and obviously Ulisha knows this, so she says they will simply wait at an inn until Kurt finishes building the entire Atelier. She asks Kurt if he can finish by the end of the day. But even for Kurt, building an entire Atelier in one day is completely surreal. However, he says he will likely be able to finish in 3 days. Ulisha says he can take as much time as he wants because she does not want to rush him, and that if he needs extra materials for the Atelier, he can ask her. Kurt is happy to hear this, as he already has a list of items in mind, so he writes it down and asks Ulisha to obtain the materials for him. The items on the list include things such as amethyst and griffin feathers, so Estina asks why Kurt would need those if he is just going to build an Atelier, but Ulisha knows it is better not to question him. She simply says she will do her best to acquire these items, though it will take some time to gather them, so Kurt will have to wait 2 days, and he does not mind that. Estina still cannot ignore the feeling that something is wrong, and Ulisha is beginning to notice her suspicion, but both pretend everything is normal for now. Ulisha tells everyone to go immediately to the inn so that Kurt can work in peace, but before they go, she reminds Kurt that he needs to rest and eat. She makes him promise to return to the inn at nightfall. Meanwhile, when the others arrive at the inn, Ulisha makes everyone sit down because she has something important to say. Until now, Ken and Danzo thought Kurt was just an ordinary person, but Ulisha cannot hide the truth forever, especially since Estina has already seen some of the absurd things Kurt is capable of. Estina asks Ulisha to explain who Kurt is, but before that, Ulisha wants to introduce herself properly. She displays the royal family crest and says she is an adventurer working for the royal family, and the lady sitting before them is Lai, the third princess of the kingdom. The three are completely shocked to hear this, and Ken feels he should stand up to greet her properly, but Lai says that will not be necessary. She is hiding her identity at the moment, so she asks that they continue treating her as if she were an ordinary girl. Estina asks if this means Kurt is also royalty, but Ulisha informs her that he is a commoner. Not exactly common, but he is not a noble. The truth is that Ulisha still has no idea who Kurt really is, but she knows that while all his combat skills are G rank, literally every other skill he possesses is SSS rank. The three are speechless upon hearing this, because SSS rank skills are practically an urban legend. But considering Kurt's capabilities, it makes sense. Ulisha says that Kurt's true skill level is currently confidential information, so none of them can speak about it. Not even Kurt knows his own level, as Ulisha and Mimiko lied and told him he was only B rank. In reality, the new Atelier Meister will be Kurt himself, but Ulisha has no intention of telling him the truth yet. Estina stands up furiously and shouts at Ulisha because she cannot understand why she would lie to Kurt in this manner. Ulisha says that Kurt probably would not believe her even if she told him the truth. She tries to justify herself by saying she is only trying to keep Kurt safe, because if the information about his abilities became public, people might try to exploit him. But from what Estina can see, it is Ulisha who is exploiting Kurt now. Ulisha has no response to this, so she simply remains in silence. Estina then turns away because she wants nothing to do with all this confusion. After a while, Danzo asks for more information, so Lai shares that just a few days ago, Kurt broke a deadly curse that had been placed upon her, and he accomplished this using a bowl of porridge. Someone is currently attempting to take Lai's life, and that is why this entire plan by the Eight-Leer Master was created. The idea is to lure the assassins out and find the person behind all of this. But again, Kurt knows nothing about any of this. It might seem selfish to drag him into the plan without telling him the truth, but both Lai and Ulisha truly care about him, so they would never want anything bad to happen to Kurt. Lai asks them if they would be willing to keep the secret. In this way, they would join forces to ensure Kurt's safety. As adventurers, Danzo says they have no obligation to obey orders from a member of royalty, but Kurt is their friend, so they will do anything to protect him. Ken feels the same way, and Lai is happy to know that they are in agreement. But Estina thinks they are going too far. Since they have known Kurt for only 2 days, Ulisha understands how Estina feels, because although they speak of Kurt as if he were an old friend, the truth is that she met him literally last week, and she is still having difficulty believing everything she has seen him do in these last few days. Estina says she needs to take a walk to clear her mind before making any hasty decisions, and while she is out, she begins walking toward Kurt's workplace because she thinks he should know the truth about his strength. But to her total shock, in these few hours since they left, Kurt has already finished building the foundation of the Eight-Leer. She asks if he really did all of that by himself, and Kurt confirms that he thinks all of this is normal, since Ulisha said he is rank B. But obviously, no rank B worker could achieve something like that. Kurt's understanding of the ranks is totally distorted, and the fact that in his village people built 12 houses in a single day does not help. So from Kurt's point of view, he is moving much slower than he should be. Estina still thinks it is wrong that Ulisha is using Kurt to build the Eight-Leer, and so she asks if he is upset about having all this work thrown upon his shoulders. However, Kurt says he has no reason to be upset, because in reality, he enjoys doing it. When he was part of the heroes' party, they always called him useless and even expelled him. But here everyone recognizes how useful he is, and that is more than he could ask for. Meanwhile, Danzo is in the town square because he needs to meet with an important informant who looks very much like Bandana. Danzo's group only hired Kurt because their porter fell ill, but it turns out that the porter Bibin was actually a spy who joined Danzo's group with the sole objective of destroying them from the inside. He was apparently hired by a rival group of adventurers who were jealous of how well Danzo's group was doing. She has already located Bibin and provided detailed instructions on how to find him, so Danzo is free to use that information as he wishes. Danzo then pays her for a job well done, and later that night he goes to a tavern. At one of those tables is the bald and disgusting fellow, who is complaining to himself, because not only did the waitress look at him with disgust after he tried to touch her, but also his plan to kill Danzo's group failed completely. However, he already has a new plan ready, because he received information that Danzo's group is working on an Eight-Leer for the royalty, which has connections to the third princess, and so if he targets that, he will surely make a lot of money. Danzo then asks if he is enjoying his last drink. As soon as Bibin realizes it is Danzo, he enters a panic and begins to flee. Bibin runs through the alley, but ends up tripping over a well-positioned wire, so he falls to the ground while Danzo approaches slowly. Initially, Danzo had ignored Bibin's strange behavior when he said he was sick during that mining mission, but now Danzo is certain that all of it was a setup. Bibin tries to pretend he has no idea what Danzo is talking about, but it is already too late for that. Then Danzo draws his sword and delivers a strike to Bibin's neck, but at the last second decides to let him live. He prefers not to soil his hands with blood because of this, so he warns Bibin to stay away from him and his friends, otherwise, next time, he will not be so merciful. Danzo then leaves, and from behind a corner, we see Bandana observing everything. She is disappointed that Danzo did not finish the job, because Bibin will likely be a problem in the future, so now she will have to finish him off personally. However, before she can do anything, 2 hooded men appear suddenly and begin to take Bibin away. Bandana recognizes them as members of the Ghost Squad, who operate directly under the command of Mimiko. She wonders why a royal court mage would be involved in something like this. But then she receives a letter from her messenger Crow. It is from her superior, telling her to avoid interfering too much. This is because the matter is under Marlis's jurisdiction. Once again, Bandana is disappointed, but she has clear orders not to interfere with Marlis's operation. And since there is nothing more for her to do there, it is time to return to Kurt's hometown. But speaking of Marlis, things are not going well for her at all, because she has been captured and is being held inside a magic circle. Back in the city, Danzo and Ken wake up the next morning, and are completely shocked when they see the 8-layer that Kurt managed to build. He even had time to install trees and fences, and no one has any idea how he managed to make them grow in a single day. While the others are impressed, Lai is busy fantasizing about marrying Kurt and living there with him for the rest of her life. At that moment, Kurt comes out to greet everyone and invites them to enter. He gives a small tour of the house, including the main entrance, the 2 underground floors, and the water purification system, which he created using magic gems. He also made rooms for everyone, and a special room for the 8-layer master. But speaking of that, Lai still has not told Kurt who the 8-layer master will be. She still does not want to tell Kurt that he is the master there, so she makes up an excuse saying that the 8-layer master is busy. Next, she tries to change the subject by asking Kurt where his room is, but the boy's self-esteem is so low that he thinks he does not deserve a room, since all he is good for is doing chores. He is planning to sleep in a broom closet, but everyone immediately refuses to let that happen. They tell Kurt to use the room he made for the 8-layer master, since no one is using it at the moment, but it takes them 2 hours to convince him to accept it. As a side note, Lai asks Kurt if he can create a barrier around the house. That way, it would ward off curses, but Kurt has never tried to make a barrier before, so he is not sure if he will succeed. In that case, Lai will have to settle for the barrier spells that Mimiko made previously, so she spends the entire night installing them around the house. The last seal needs to be placed right in front of Lai's room, so Lai goes there to hang it. But when Lai hears footsteps outside her room, she thinks Kurt is trying to sneak in, so she runs to welcome him with open arms. However, upon seeing Alicia, she is very disappointed, because she was looking forward to spending the night in bed with Kurt. Alicia tells her to stop thinking about strange things and warns Lai not to take advantage of Kurt's innocence, because with how much he wants to be useful, if she asked for something of that sort, he would probably accept. The next morning, Kurt is preparing breakfast for everyone when Lai appears wearing only an apron. Alicia yells at her for trying to corrupt Kurt, but Lai says it is fine because she is actually wearing clothes underneath. Anyway, when breakfast is ready, everyone sits down to eat and they love the food Kurt made. But speaking of Kurt, Alicia wonders why he is not there with them. Lai remembers hearing Kurt say he wanted to do some cleaning, since someone had made graffiti all over the walls of the mansion. Alicia immediately realizes that he was probably talking about the barrier spells she installed. But normally it should not be possible to erase them with a cloth. But we are talking about Kurt, so she runs out to stop him. Unfortunately, she arrives too late, because Kurt has already erased all the barrier spells and still thinks it was just ordinary graffiti, since Lai never told him about the assassination attempt by Curse against Lai. Now Lai is completely vulnerable to curses again, and Mimiko is not there to create new barrier spells, so Lai does not know what to do. Meanwhile, Marlis has been summoned by the bishop of the church, and as soon as she meets with him, he says she is being excommunicated. Marlis cannot believe it and asks why this is happening. So the bishop explains that there is plenty of evidence along with complaints that the Dragon's Fangs group is violent and destructive. In fact, the bishop recently heard that Golov is currently a wanted criminal. Therefore, the church no longer wants to be associated with Marlis. Marlis tries to explain herself, saying that she personally did nothing wrong, except for the time she electrocuted a waiter to death. But in her defense, she did not like the food he served. That excuse is quite flimsy, but the bishop is also not exactly a good person. So he tells Marlis that he is willing to ignore her trivial sins and perhaps even grant her the position of priestess if she does one thing for him. As soon as Marlis hears that she could be promoted to a priestess, her eyes widen with excitement. Thus, she is willing to do anything the bishop asks. The first thing the bishop does is pour a glass of wine. Then he asks Marlis to drink. But things take a completely different turn than she expected, because the bishop says he wants her to help assassinate the third princess of the kingdom. Marlis normally would never agree to something like that, but that wine she just drank placed a curse upon her. So she is condemned to die a painful death unless she agrees to assassinate the princess. With no other choice, she vows to help the bishop with his plan. And this plan involves trapping Marlis in a magic circle with a demon nearby. While all of this is happening, things are quite normal at Kurt's mansion. Everyone is enjoying a great breakfast, and for some reason, Lai has not received any new curses. Despite the fact that Kurt erased all the protections against curses, Ulisha still has not been able to figure out why, but since they have easy access to Kurt's magical cooking, it should be able to neutralize any curse cast upon Lai. In any case, it does not seem that she needs to worry about Lai's safety anymore, especially because Mimiko has finally arrived in the city. And with the help of Lai, they have set up an information network that will lead them to anyone attempting to harm Lai. Lai notices that there is something different about the cake Kurt made today, so Kurt explains that he made it using rice flour instead of common flour. Lai loves the flavor because it reminds her of the rice porridge Kurt made for her when they first met, so she asks Kurt if he could make it for her again in case she is cursed another time. Kurt says he would be happy to make as much rice porridge as she wants, and Lai does not need to worry about being cursed again. Ulisha is surprised to hear him say this, so she asks how he can be so sure, given that he said he could not create barriers against curses. Kurt confirms that he cannot create barriers inside the house, but that is only because the entire mansion already functions as a barrier against curses. This means that any magic related to curses will be reflected, even though Kurt has made some adjustments. By coincidence, the assassins who are after Lai decided to cast another curse on her. So the mage begins the ritual of his ultimate curse, but instead of working as expected, the curse simply disappears, and the mage ends up being cursed with a permanent flash effect on his face. Kurt configured the barrier to do this since he did not want to accidentally kill someone with a reflected curse, even though the person probably deserved it. And this was a much better option. Ulisha is once again impressed by Kurt's skill, and she is happy that he is keeping Lai safe. But she needs to find Lai and Mimiko so they can start looking for anyone who is glowing like a light bulb. Since Ulisha will be out for a while, Kurt approaches Lai asking if she would like to go shopping with him. Lai is in disbelief as she realizes that Kurt is basically inviting her on a date, but he just thought it would be good to take a walk around the city, especially since Lai has not left the mansion yet. Lai accepts the invitation, but given the circumstances, she cannot go out at all. Meanwhile, on the city walls, Olmarg and his son are worried because it seems that a horde of monsters is approaching the city, although they probably do not need to worry that much because the walls have already been fully restored and the army is ready to fight at any moment. At the same time, Ulisha, Mimiko, and Lai have just found the lightbulb man, but it seems he was killed by his own companions because taking him with them would draw too much attention. Still, Ulisha is surprised to see that the glowing curse created by Kurt remains active, even after the death of the target. And if he is capable of doing something like that in such a short time, Lai thinks they should simply tell everything to Kurt and ask for his help, as they would likely manage to find the assassins much faster that way. But Ulisha says she does not want to involve Kurt, even though they have already involved him quite a bit up to this point. At that moment, alarm bells begin to ring throughout the city because the monsters have started to attack. Olmarg orders all of his soldiers to cast light spells so they can see the monsters they are fighting, and to his horror, he sees an absurdly large horde of skeletons walking slowly toward the walls. There is no way his men can face so many at the same time, so he orders a group of soldiers to remain there with him to hold back the skeletons, even if it costs them their lives. Meanwhile, the rest must focus on evacuating as many citizens as possible. Olmarg was completely prepared to sacrifice himself for his people, but to his surprise, as soon as the skeletons reach the walls, they all begin to suddenly disappear. Olmarg has no idea what is happening, but then he remembers that this part of the wall was repaired by Kurt, and therefore presumes that he must have something to do with it. The entire army of skeletons ends up disappearing, and we return to Marlis, who is still trapped in a magic circle. The bishop made a contract with this advanced demon to kill the princess, and the demon is using Marlis's strength and magic power as if it were a battery to summon the monsters. And since the first wave has already failed, he intends to continue summoning skeletons until he completely drains Marlis's mana and life force. Back in the city, Kurt has just heard about the monster attacks, so he asks Ulisha if they will be alright. Ulisha tells him that the city is surrounded by monsters on all sides, and although the knights are doing their best to devise a counter-attack strategy, there is not much they can do at the moment. The only reason the city is still standing now is that a large number of skeletons were purified as soon as they touched the walls. Kurt explains that he enchanted the walls when he repaired them, and things like that were quite common in his village, so he is surprised that the people here do not enchant their walls. That being said, Kurt was only able to work on 2 of the city's 4 walls, and so if the skeletons end up attacking the normal parts, they will break through quickly. Lai does the most sensible and intelligent thing, politely asking Kurt if he could simply create a weapon capable of eliminating all the skeletons. Kurt begins to think about this, but before he can do anything, Lai interrupts herself suddenly, saying she needs to go out for a while. And before leaving, she reminds Kurt and Ulisha that they must not leave the mansion for any reason. Ulisha is perfectly satisfied with this, as it means she will have some time alone with Kurt. And then Ulisha goes to the storage room and takes a box full of magic crystals that Kurt made. With her secret weapon ready, Ulisha, Lai, and Mimiko go to Olmarg to tell him their plan. Olmarg recognizes Ulisha, as they are old friends, but is surprised to see her in his city. Ulisha says she has a plan to stop the skeleton horde, and since they seem to be coming from nearby ruins, she intends to go there and destroy their source of power. However, for this, she needs Olmarg and his men to act as bait, luring the skeletons so that she can reach the ruins. Olmarg says the plan is too risky for him to agree to, but Ulisha assures him that she is certain it will work, especially because she possesses a secret weapon. She shows him one of the magic crystals Kurt made and assures him that it has enough power to destroy a building, so it will be more than enough to destroy the ruins and stop the skeleton horde. Since Ulisha is so determined, Olmarg agrees to help her, but only on the condition that she allows him to accompany her on the mission. Ulisha knows that Olmarg is strong enough to handle this, but asks if he is truly sure he wants to go, because it will be very dangerous. Olmarg refuses to back down, as his duty is to ensure the safety of the city. Furthermore, while he is away, his Vice General Generic can command the troops in his place. While the soldiers go out to distract the monsters, Mimiko and Leah can help protect the city from new attacks. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Kurt has just finished sweeping the garden when he begins to think about what he was going to say earlier regarding creating a weapon. He goes to the forge he built, and thus he begins to work on something. In his village, blacksmiths could always create incredible weapons with ease, and although Kurt still does not have much confidence in his abilities, he wants to be useful to his friends, so he is going to do everything he can to create a good weapon. At the same time, Ulisha and Olmarg are about to leave, but there is a horde of monsters blocking the exit, so she takes one of the magic crystals and prepares to use it. She warns all the soldiers to close their eyes, and as soon as the crystal hits the monsters, a blinding flash eliminates them completely. Ulisha knew that Kurt's crystals were powerful, but she had no idea they were capable of purifying so many monsters at once. In any case, this works in their favor, so the soldiers go out to contain the next wave of monsters, while Ulisha and Olmarg head toward the ruins. Back at the mansion, Kurt has just finished forging the blade, but after providing the final touches, his insecurities begin to affect him. He was told that his blacksmithing skills were only rank B, so he does not believe that a sword made by him could be good enough to fight against the monsters. Shortly after, Lai goes to look for Kurt to ask about dinner, but then she notices the sword in his hand and thinks it is very beautiful. Kurt says she can keep the sword if she liked it that much, but she needs to be careful since he imbued it with a lot of magic. Lai thanks Kurt for the gift, but although Kurt may be distracted when it comes to his own skills, he knows how to recognize a forced smile. Obviously, there is something bothering Lai, and he would be lying if he said he had not noticed it before, so he asks Lai if someone is after her. She is surprised that Kurt noticed, but admits he is right and apologizes for all the trouble she has caused. Kurt says she does not need to worry, but Lai feels very bad because everyone is in constant danger because of her. In fact, at this moment, Ulisha is out there risking her life because of Lai. Kurt may have realized someone is after Lai, but he still has no idea that she is a princess or that protecting her is a matter of national security. All he knows is that Ulisha went to settle something at the nearby ruins, and he remembers a time when Golov made graffiti all over those ruins, so he thinks Ulisha must be fighting a graffiti artist who has been stalking Lai. He is completely wrong in this conclusion, but that does not change the fact that Ulisha is fighting because of Lai, and Kurt is totally powerless to help her because his combat attributes are horrible. He cannot stand the feeling of not being able to protect those he cares about, and Lai feels the same, as she does not like the fact that people put themselves in danger because of her. She would prefer to fight to protect herself if she could, and since she brought up the subject, Kurt suggests that the two of them go out and capture the culprit on their own. Lai likes the idea but asks how they will leave the city, since it is completely surrounded by monsters at the moment. Kurt says that is not a problem, as he has his own methods for dealing with this type of situation. And there on the battlefield, Ulisha suddenly has a bad feeling that Kurt is about to do something crazy again. Back at the mansion, Lai is preparing to go out for battle when she realizes she has not yet tested the magic blade that Kurt gave her. She is curious to discover what kind of magic it possesses, so she raises it above her head, but to her surprise, nothing happens. Kurt then enters the room to ask if Lai has finished preparing, and when she looks at him, it is clear that the magic sword definitely did something. Meanwhile, Ulisha and Omarg are still trying to clear a path through the horde of zombies. Thanks to the distraction group, the monsters there have decreased, but there are still many, and Ulisha has already been using those magic crystals for a long time, so she is almost running out of them. At that moment, Omarg is stabbed in the abdomen by one of the monsters, so Ulisha tries to help him but ends up surrounded by the monsters, and unfortunately, she will not have time to take a crystal to save herself. Fortunately, at the last second, Ken and the others appear to save her. They heard about the situation there, so as soon as they finished their mission, they returned as quickly as possible. Eventually, they found the location from where all the monsters are emerging. So Ulisha uses one of the magic crystals to eliminate all the monsters in the area, allowing them to reach the entrance of the building. Ulisha gives Omarg some of Kurt's healing soup so that he can recover from the wound, and as soon as he returns to a full state, she prepares to enter. More monsters begin to come out of the building, but Ken and the others say they will take care of it. Thus, Ulisha and Omarg can enter without them. Being deep within the ruins, Marlis is still being drained of her mana, and at this rate, she will certainly die sooner or later. But the demon does not care about that at all. However, he also does not care about the fact that the humans are managing to resist the monsters, as they are doing much better than he expected. He is especially impressed with Ulisha and Omarg, since they have already managed to enter the ruins, so he decides to go deal with them personally. While running through the corridors, Ulisha and Omarg eventually find a location from where the zombies are being generated, so she throws one of Kurt's magic crystals, and this completely eliminates the monsters along with the spell that was being used to summon them. Ulisha is honestly surprised that everything went so well, but life is not a bowl of cherries, because the demon appears in front of them a few moments later, and now they must face him. Ulisha advances and uses one of the magic crystals as a weapon against the demon. But although the power of the crystal indeed strikes him, it has no effect because, according to the demon, he has infinite HP. Omarg does not believe this, so he tries to cut the demon in the abdomen, but it causes no effect at all. The wound on the demon closes almost instantaneously, but not because he has infinite life. It is because he is using Marlis's mana to heal himself, and this is draining a great deal from her. The demon tells Omarg and Ulisha that they are very good compared to most humans he has faced, but in the end, they are no match for him. And the same applies to all their friends fighting outside. Everyone is desperate to protect the city, but eventually, they will die at the hands of a legion of zombies. Omarg asserts that none of his men will lose to a simple monster, but the demon says he can simply summon more until they are overwhelmed. Even the three who are fighting outside the ruins will stand no chance against the next wave he sends. But Ulisha and Omarg refuse to let that happen. The two attack at the same time, and Ulisha cuts off the demon's head while Omarg stabs him in the heart. But the demon simply picks his own head back up and continues speaking. He says he will slaughter all the knights and then go after the princess, but just for fun, perhaps he will leave Ulisha and Omarg alive so they can watch her die a painful death. Ulisha does not want to let that happen, but she has no idea what to do in this situation because none of her attacks work and even Kurt's magic crystals were not enough to kill the demon. Meanwhile, Marlis has already accepted her fate because she has lost so much strength that she could not escape even if she could leave that magic circle. Furthermore, because of the curse the bishop placed upon her, she has not eaten for days, so she is hungrier than ever. She would like to taste Kurt's food one last time before dying, and she begins to hallucinate because she could swear she was hearing Kurt's voice now. But it is not a hallucination, because Kurt and Lai have just dug a path to the chamber. Marlis is very surprised to see Kurt there, and even more so to realize that he brought the princess along. She thinks Kurt must have discovered that she is involved in the plan to assassinate Lai, so he brought the princess there to witness everything. But Kurt had no idea that Marlis was there before arriving. Kurt asks Marlis if she is the person attacking Lai, but Marlis explains that she was excommunicated from the church and was deceived in all of this by Bishop Tristan. Kurt and Lai hear what she said, but they are on completely different wavelengths. Lai realizes that Tristan must be responsible for all the assassination attempts against her. Meanwhile, Kurt thinks Marlis must be drawing graffiti everywhere because she is frustrated about being excommunicated. Marlis has no idea what Kurt is talking about, and neither does Lai. But she supports everything Kurt says, regardless of whether it makes sense or not. Kurt asks Marlis if she knows where Ulisha is, and Marlis has no idea who Ulisha is, but she remembers seeing two adventurers on their way there, so they must be on the floor above this one. Kurt thanks her for the information and turns to go look for Ulisha, fully prepared to leave Marlis behind because he thinks the magic circle is just graffiti. However, Lai asks him to help clean up the magic circle while she goes to look for Ulisha. Kurt tries to stop her, as it would be dangerous for her to go alone, but she reminds him that he gave her a magic sword, so she will be fine on her own. Kurt eventually agrees to let her go, and while Lai is out, he pulls a mop and a bucket from out of nowhere and prepares to start cleaning. Marlis thinks he is crazy because there is no way to destroy a magic circle with ordinary water and a mop. But Kurt is too naive to understand what impossible means, so he simply mops away the magic circle. As soon as the magic circle is broken, the demon realizes that his mana supply has been cut off, so he can no longer afford to take hits and begins to dodge Ulisha and Omarg's attacks. Neither of them understands what is happening, but the fact that the demon is dodging means that he is now afraid of getting hurt. Ulisha grabs the last magic crystal in her bag to finally defeat him, but the demon knocks it from her hand before she can use it, and without that crystal, the chances of victory are minimal. The demon is about to start taking the fight seriously, but suddenly Lai appears and calls for Ulisha. Lai has been the demon's target from the beginning, so he stabs her to death instantly and begins to laugh at how foolish she was for coming alone. However, to his surprise, Li's body transforms into butterflies, and she reveals that she was merely a clone. The demon cannot believe it, because he was certain he had stabbed the real one. But that was only an illusion created by the Sword of Confusion. As the name suggests, it creates illusions capable of confusing anyone, whether by showing an incoherent sequence of chaotic images or, in this case, a perfect duplicate of Li. The demon attempts to kill Li a few more times, but every time he strikes her, he discovers it was only an illusion. And while the demon was busy with all those illusions, the real Li managed to reach the magic crystal that Ulisha had dropped, and then she breaks it, and the explosion of energy eliminates the demon. And since the demon was the one who had summoned all the zombies, now that he is gone, all the monsters also disappear. The crisis has finally ended, and everyone in the city can rest easy knowing they are safe. But Ulisha is angry with Li for putting herself in danger in that manner. Li apologizes for coming without permission, but she did not want to continue hiding while others fought for her. Ulisha is still angry, but she has no right to be angry with Li, because if she had not appeared at that moment, that demon would have killed her and Omarg. Omarg wants to personally thank Li for saving him, but she says it is not necessary because he fought even more than she did. She thanks him for all his effort in defending the city and promises to give him a reward for his courageous actions. Meanwhile, Kurt has just finished cleaning the remainder of the magic circle. But even with the circle destroyed, Marlis's curse still prevents her from eating any food. Therefore, sooner or later, she will die of hunger. At that moment, Kurt offers some of his lunch to her, as he realizes she is hungry, and Marlis appreciates the gesture. But if she eats that, her curse will only cause her to vomit everything. Even so, she decides to eat, so she can taste Kurt's food one last time before dying. However, upon taking a bite, she realizes she can eat normally, and a few moments later, the curse in her stomach is dissipated. Obviously, it was Kurt's food that cured her, but this is the first time Marlis truly realizes what Kurt is capable of. She begins to remember all the things Kurt did for her and the rest of the group, and she finally understands that the only reason the dragon's fangs were strong was because they had Kurt's support. So she offers a sincere apology for the way she treated him. Marlis did well to recognize Kurt's strength, but that is not enough to prevent her from being arrested, as two of Mimiko's agents appear to arrest Marlis for her connection to this entire assassination plot. Marlis tries to call Kurt to help her, so Kurt promises to visit her in prison whenever she wants. After Marlis is taken to prison, Ulisha approaches Kurt to ask if he is alright. Kurt says he is fine, and that, in fact, he is more concerned about Ulisha and the others who were fighting. But Li reassures him saying that everyone is fine, as they drank some of the medicine Kurt made. As soon as everyone returns from the battlefield, Kurt invites everyone to a banquet at the mansion. But after everyone sits down to eat, all the soldiers fall silent and only stuff their faces with food. Kurt begins to get worried, thinking they are forcing themselves to eat out of politeness since they do not seem happy. But Olmarg says he misunderstood. They are silent because that food is the best thing they have ever tasted, so they are focused on eating as much as possible. Kurt is happy that everyone likes the food, while everyone continues eating. Lee calls Olmarg to formally introduce him to Kurt. Kurt recognizes him. He is the person in charge of the construction from the time he repaired the city walls. But Lee informs him that Olmarg is also responsible for governing the city and all the people within it. At that moment, several fireworks begin to explode, and everyone is marveled by the spectacle. Kurt explains that he thought it would be nice to have a show along with the food, so he prepared some fireworks in advance. But speaking of the food, Olmarg mentions that all of his injuries were suddenly healed after he ate. But Kurt does not understand what the big deal is, as it was always normal to heal after having a good meal back in his village. 10 years ago, when Kurt still lived in his home village, there was a merchant who came to do business there. For various reasons, people generally do not visit Hasty, so Kurt rarely had the chance to meet new people. And the merchant happened to have a daughter the same age as him, so he wanted to talk to her. Kurt approaches the girl and tries to initiate a conversation, but she ignores him completely and continues carving her wood. Kurt continues trying and even compliments her beautiful horns, but nothing he does is enough to draw her attention. So Kurt is on the verge of tears. Hildegard feels bad now, so she apologizes, telling Kurt that her father ordered her not to speak to any residents of Hasty, because, according to him, they are a bunch of weirdos. But Kurt does not seem strange to her, so she would love to play with him. Kurt becomes excited to finally have a new friend, and the two get along very well. So they end up taking a golem ride to the forest so that Kurt can show some beautiful flowers to Hildegard. Hildegard is excited, so as soon as she steps off the golem, she runs ahead of Kurt. Then she sees some colorful fruits growing nearby, so she takes a handful and eats them without knowing what they are. A few seconds later, she realizes there was something wrong with the fruits, but it is already too late. The fruits have entered her system, and she falls to the ground unconscious. Kurt runs to her to check and immediately recognizes the poisonous fruits that Hildegard ate. And it is only a matter of time until she dies because of the poison. Fortunately, Kurt knows how to make the cure, so he takes a nearby flower and begins to prepare the medicine. However, in Hildegard's current state, there is no way for her to drink it on her own, so Kurt puts the medicine in his own mouth and prepares to feed her himself. Back in the present, Ulisha wakes Kurt up because they are approaching the village that requested help. Basically, the village chief says they are on the verge of dying of thirst because their water reserves have practically run out. He says they will not survive another week like this, but according to the map, the neighboring village should have a large aqueduct on its lands, so she tells the chief to simply ask the other village to share some water with them. However, the chief says he has already tried that, and the chief of that village refused to give any water. That is why he called Ulisha, hoping that with her connection to the new Aetlier, she could force the other village to share its water. Ulisha does not like the idea of forcing people to do something, but agrees to go to the village to see if she can negotiate a water agreement with them. Then she returns to the others to explain the situation. But everyone except Danzo has already left. Ulisha asks him where the others went. So Danzo explains that they went to the top of that hill to see some birds. If they are having fun, then Ulisha has no intention of boring them with negotiations, so she gets on a horse and heads toward Village B. However, to her shock, when she arrives there, the chief of Village B says the aqueduct is also empty, begging for Ulisha's help because his residents will soon die of thirst at this rate. Ulisha does not know what to do at this point, because if all the water reserves are empty, there is nothing to do but pray for rain. At that moment, some residents arrive running because they have urgent news about the hill. Ulisha knows that is where Kurt and the others went to play, so she runs there to see what is happening. Then she comes face to face with an entire lake there. She is very confused, wanting to know why villages A and B were complaining about a lack of water if there is a huge lake right there. But what Astina tells Ulisha is that the lake was not there a few minutes ago. At that moment, Kurt appears running, and she has lived with him long enough to know that he must have had something to do with it. Kurt was initially there to observe the birds, but then he noticed they seemed thirsty, so he decided to give them water and dug down to an aquifer to create that lake. Leaving that aside for a moment, he wants to know if Ulisha has finished speaking with the village chief. But before she can answer, the chiefs of villages A and B begin to thank Ulisha, as they believe it was she who created the lake. Ulisha tries to explain that she did not do it, but the two are too busy being grateful to the village. As thanks, the village chiefs give Ulisha and the others a basket of eggs to take home. And Kurt was already thinking about all the incredible food he can make for everyone. However, Lai is not at home now because she needs to go with Olmarg to give a report about the monster attack to Lord Theon at his palace. After inviting Lai and Olmarg to enter, he sits down to have tea with them. Theon has authority equivalent to that of a duke, but it is no secret that most of his power comes from his connections. That is why he is trying so hard to please Lai, because he wants to further strengthen his connection with the royal family. But Lai has already noticed his false kindness. Theon mentions that he heard rumors that during the battle there were special magic crystals, powerful enough to eliminate all monsters within a 500-meter radius. And while this is indeed true, Lai tells him that the crystals were not actually that powerful. She is attempting to hide Kurt's ability so that Theon does not get any ideas about using him for his own benefit. She had already made plans to thwart all of Theon's attempts by trying to meet with the Eight-Leer Master, but she is caught completely by surprise when Theon says he is thinking about naming the Eight-Leer Master as the vice-governor of the city. Lai realizes that if Kurt were named vice-governor, he would have to make a public appearance. However, at the moment, Kurt does not even know he is the Eight-Leer Master, so explaining all of this to him would be difficult. Lai tries to get out of it, saying she cannot make decisions on behalf of the Eight-Leer Master. Theon calls this a lie, because she is literally acting on behalf of the Eight-Leer Master, so she should be able to provide an answer. Furthermore, Theon is certain that the knights would be happy to have the Eight-Leer Master as the city's new leader, and as the captain of the knights and interim leader. Theon turns to Olmarg seeking approval. Lai begins to panic because Olmarg does not know that Kurt is the Eight-Leer Master, and if he approves the new appointment, she will no longer be able to escape this situation. She prays silently for Olmarg to postpone the decision, but Olmarg affirms enthusiastically, saying he would be happy to welcome the Eight-Leer Master as the new vice-governor of the city. Lai desperately tries to back down, but then Theon asks a question, wanting to know if she thinks the Eight-Leer Master is too incompetent to govern a city, and her love for Kurt speaks louder. So she begins to say that the Eight-Leer Master is the most competent person on the planet, and that it would be easy for him to govern the city. A few moments later, Lai realizes she has made a mistake because she just agreed to have Kurt become the new vice-governor of the city, and she has no idea what to do. Later, she meets with Ulisha to explain everything that happened, and fixing this is not going to be easy at all. Ulisha asks if they cannot simply find someone to pretend to be the Eight-Leer Master, but Lai thinks that would not be possible because no random person would have enough skill to do what Kurt does. And speaking of Kurt, Lai has not seen him all day, so she asks Ulisha if she knows where he is. Ulisha tells Lai that Kurt is busy raising a child, and Lai begins to panic because she had no idea that Kurt had a son. She also feels disappointed that she is not the mother of Kurt's child, so she immediately begins making plans to adopt the child as her own. However, Ulisha says she is misunderstanding the situation. Apparently, one of the eggs they gathered in the village was fertile, so Kurt decided to look after them until they hatched. But knowing Kurt, she says she would not be surprised if he raised a chicken that laid golden eggs. At that moment, Kurt calls out Ulisha's name, saying his egg has just hatched. But when she goes to check, she is shocked to see that Kurt has somehow raised a daughter for himself. Simply put, Kurt was just looking after the egg, but out of nowhere, this little girl came out of it, and she is calling Kurt Papa, so he practically is her father now, and Kurt seems quite happy about this. However, Ulisha has a different opinion. She says that humans are not born from eggs, so even if Kurt is willing to accept her as a daughter, he cannot pretend she is a normal person. Most likely, she is some special kind of monster, and the fact that she calls him Papa must only be a trick to make him lower his guard. Kurt understands what Ulisha is implying, so he asks if she really thinks his daughter is going to kill him. Ulisha does not answer, but tells Kurt to hand over the girl immediately. Kurt asks what she intends to do with her, and Ulisha responds directly that she is going to kill the girl for the sake of everyone. Kurt refuses to let that happen, so he promises that he will not let the girl hurt anyone. but Ulisha refuses to listen to him and snatches her from his arms. However, before Ulisha can do anything, the baby holds her face and calls her Mama. Instantly, Ulisha changes her mind, and she begins to imagine a life as a happy family with Kurt. But Lai notices that Ulisha is thinking about her man at that moment, so she takes the child to pull her out of that state. Then the girl also calls Lai Mama, and she practically melts with joy at the thought of being a mother along with Kurt. Ulisha tries to resist the cuteness, insisting that the girl could be dangerous, but those who stop her say they do not need to make any hasty decisions now. The girl is still young, and if she is raised by careful people like them, there is no way she will become evil. Everyone says they want to welcome the girl, and honestly, after imagining a future with that child, Ulisha can no longer force herself to kill her, so she agrees to let her stay. Now that everyone has decided to keep the girl, Lai says they should choose a name for her, so everyone sits down to think of one. Kurt thinks they should call her Heir, because in the language of the Lape civilization, it is a name that symbolizes the connection between points. Both Ulisha and Lai seem to like the name, and the girl does too, so from now on she will be called Heir. Later that night, Ulisha is sleeping on the sofa with Heir on top of her, but although she agreed to keep her, it does not mean she is no longer suspicious about the child's origin. One of Mimiko's agents approaches her, and Ulisha hands over an envelope containing samples of Heir's hair and saliva, and as soon as Mimiko receives the samples, she will be able to analyze them to discover what Heir truly is. The next morning, Kurt and Ulisha show Heir the toy room that Kurt made for her, but in reality, this was made to be a prison, to keep her there until Mimiko finishes conducting the tests. It has no windows and the walls are reinforced with mithril, so there is no way for her to escape the room on her own. Ulisha feels bad for asking Kurt to do this, as it seems a bit cruel to isolate a child from the world. But this is only a temporary measure until they are certain that Heir is not a threat. For now, they plan to let Estina play with her while she and Kurt finish one more mission. But as soon as Heir hears that Kurt and Ulisha are leaving, she stops playing and says she wants to go with them. Kurt tells Heir that she cannot go because they are going on a mission, but he promises that as soon as he finishes he will return to play with her, and Heir seems to accept this. While Kurt and Ulisha are traveling by carriage to the village that requested help, Ulisha notices that Kurt is upset about leaving Heir behind, so she says they should focus on completing the mission as quickly as possible so they can see Heir again. But at that moment, they hear a voice coming from inside the carriage. Kurt and Ulisha stop to see what it is, and to their surprise, it is Heir. Neither of them has any idea how she managed to escape the room, because a child-proof prison made by Kurt should be impenetrable. But Kurt simply assumes he must have made some mistake. At that moment, Ulisha notices one of Mimiko's agents nearby in disguise, so she invents an excuse to go speak with him, leaving Kurt and Heir alone. While she is away, Kurt remembers what Ulisha said about Heir possibly being a dangerous monster. He thinks he is being selfish for wanting to keep her, because if Heir really ends up attacking people, he would be unable to stop her. Ulisha returns shortly after and notices what Kurt is thinking, but she reassures him saying that he did nothing wrong. There is still a possibility that Heir might become a threat in the future, but for now she is harmless, so it is their duty as parents to ensure they raise her well so that she grows up to be a good girl. At that moment, a man suddenly appears, saying he was waiting for them because he needs the two of them to defeat the Demon King and save the world. Kurt and Heir decide to play along, promising to defeat the Demon King, but Ulisha says they did not sign up to fight any demons today. At that moment, a woman approaches, apologizing for her father's behavior. She says that the man is her father, and that he is a bit old, saying strange things. She was the one who made the request, but she is surprised to see that a newly formed couple appeared to assist her. Kurt and Ulisha become embarrassed, as with Heir there they truly look like a happy family, and it does not help that Heir calls them Papa and Mama. Kurt does not mind the misunderstanding that much, but Ulisha is paralyzed, since the client mistook her for Kurt's wife. Kurt thinks Ulisha might be upset with the idea of marrying him, but clarifying the misunderstanding would take too much time, so Kurt decides to do his best to finish the job quickly so that he and Ulisha can leave. He asks the client to say what the problem is. So she explains that her pigs have not been eating lately and she does not know what to do. The weather has been quite hot in recent days, so Kurt assumes the pigs are suffering from heat exhaustion, which leaves them too tired to eat. Kurt says he can prepare a food that will cure the pigs' exhaustion, and the client is very grateful. She leaves so that Kurt can work, but then he notices that Ulisha has still not moved from that spot. He wonders if she is still upset about the misunderstanding from earlier, but in reality, her brain is just freezing from the happiness of having been called Kurt's wife. Of course, Kurt has no idea that she is happy about this, so he decides to give Ulisha some time and begins to prepare the feed for the pigs. It takes only a few minutes to be ready, and when the pigs start eating, Ulisha's brain finally finishes processing her emotions. She begins to think that if the client mistook her for Kurt's wife, it must mean they are a good match, and perhaps she really could marry Kurt one day. However, she interrupts her own thought because she is going too far with this fantasy. She tries to convince herself that she does not want a relationship with Kurt, but every time she looks at him, her heart starts to ache, so perhaps she is in love. At that moment, a dragon flies over them, and Ulisha notices it is heading straight for Kurt and Heir, so she runs to try to save them. However, Kurt tells Ulisha to put her sword away because the dragon is not a threat. Ulisha listens to Kurt and stops in her tracks, but when she sees the dragon approaching Heir, she thinks it is going to eat her. However, the dragon only wanted to eat some of the feed that Kurt prepared. Ulisha is very confused now, but Kurt says this is perfectly normal, as in his village, dragons appeared all the time to eat. Ulisha says this is not normal at all, but there is no point in saying that every time Kurt does something absurd. In any case, Ulisha suddenly smells blood nearby, so she goes to investigate, and the scent leads her to a nearby vineyard. There, she finds one of Mimiko's agents gravely wounded on the ground, and since this agent was responsible for watching over Kurt at all times, Ulisha wonders who could have done this to him. She goes to investigate and sees someone hidden among the vines, so she draws her sword and attacks. Kurt hears a commotion and goes there to see what is happening, and to his surprise, a woman appears and demands that he hand over the child. Ulisha stands in front of Kurt to protect him, and Kurt thinks the woman must be a dragon hunter after the dragon that appeared, but Ulisha thinks it is something more serious. For now, she tells Kurt to get out of there for his own safety, but before Kurt can even respond, the dragon grabs Heir and flies away. Now Ulisha is ready to fight with all her strength against the hunter, but unfortunately, she is being completely dominated. The hunter knocks her to the ground and is about to finish Ulisha off, but at the last second, she manages to defend herself with her hoe and retreats. Ulisha asks what the hunter wants, but the hunter sees no reason to explain her objective, as it would be for someone who will soon be dead. She then advances, and despite Ulisha's best attempt to block the attack, she still finds herself cut in the stomach. Ulisha falls to the ground and the hunter approaches slowly to deliver the final blow. But before she can attack, Ulisha throws one of Kurt's magic crystals at the hunter, resulting in a huge explosion. Ulisha assumes the explosion would be enough to defeat her, but to her surprise, the hunter is perfectly fine and has just sprouted demonic horns. Ulisha is blurred with fear because it has been more than a century since a true demon voluntarily revealed itself. She does not understand why one would appear now. The demoness is quite surprised, as Ulisha caused enough damage to dissipate her human transformation. But that was expected of people who defeated the lesser demon lord. Upon hearing this, Ulisha realizes she had been watching them since the attacks of the lesser demons, so the child she was trying to kidnap might be related to Kurt. Fortunately, Kurt is already at a safe distance, but Ulisha has no hope of defeating the demon because she has already used all her weapons. The best she can do now is sacrifice herself to gain more time for Kurt to escape. But a few moments later, she sees Kurt flying straight toward her on the dragon's back. She cannot believe Kurt would do something so stupid because even if the dragon has good combat skills, Kurt is absolutely useless in a fight. And it does not help that he accidentally throws himself into a tree. Ulisha runs to Kurt, shouting at him for returning, since he has no chance of defeating the demon. but Kurt is well aware of his weakness. He knows the best choice would be to flee, but he refuses to abandon a friend, and that is why he left Heir in a safe place and returned to save Ulisha. At that moment, a group of pigs appears running toward them, and this is part of Kurt's plan. So when the herd reaches them, Kurt grabs Ulisha and jumps onto the back of one of the pigs. Ulisha asks if this is something he used to do in his hometown, but in fact, it is the first time Kurt has done something like this. He knew it was a reckless idea, but he is willing to risk his safety if this means protecting someone precious to him. However, before they could escape, the demon launches a massive fireball at them, decimating the running pigs. Kurt and Ulisha are thrown to the ground, and the demon approaches them. Ulisha needs to do something. She asks Kurt to lend her his dagger. Kurt is worried that she might get hurt, but Ulisha reassures him that she is not trying to sacrifice herself again. She promises to do her best to survive. Thus, when the demon launches another fireball at her, she raises the dagger to defend herself. The only way to survive is to use a secret spell-cutting technique, a technique that allows one to destroy a spell by cutting through its magic. However, although Ulisha has tried many times, she has never managed to execute it successfully before. And luck is not on her side today, because she fails once again to destroy the spell. It seems this is the end for Ulisha, but at the last second, Heir appears out of nowhere and embraces her. The fireball suddenly disperses, but not because of anything Ulisha did. Instead, the demon dissipated the spell on her own because she did not want to hurt Heir. Ulisha realizes that the demon must be after Heir and must care a great deal about her to go to such lengths to reach her. Ulisha tries to ask the demon some questions, but before she could say anything, the demon's injuries begin to take their toll, so she flees. A few moments later, Ulisha faints from her own wounds. Therefore, Kurt runs to her and prepares to give her some medicine. Fortunately, Ulisha's injuries were not fatal, so she will survive, and Heir strokes her face to cheer her up. Ulisha appreciates the gesture, but then remembers that Heir should not have been there in the first place, so she panics and asks how she arrived there. Kurt says he is certain he left Heir in a safe place, but Heir simply appeared out of nowhere next to Ulisha when she was about to be hit. This looks very much like teleportation, and even though it is not something rare, it always requires the use of a teleportation magic stone. So if Heir is capable of teleporting without a stone, this could be a very significant development. Ulisha asks Heir to show again how she arrived there. Heir tries, but for some reason it does not work, so she ends up giving up and says she cannot do it. Ulisha asks why, since Heir managed to teleport a long distance before. But before Heir could answer, one of the pigs appears, and Kurt and Ulisha suddenly remember that all of the client's pigs were burned during Kurt's rescue mission, and she definitely will not be happy if she sees this. So Kurt says he will heal them immediately and put them back in the pens. When the client returns, she becomes satisfied upon seeing that all of her pigs appear happier than ever before. She wishes to express her deepest gratitude for the assistance she received. But then she notices that Kurt is not there. Therefore, she asks Ulisha where her husband has gone. Ulisha panics slightly at being called Kurt's wife once again, but she regains her composure and informs the client that Kurt went to visit one of the neighboring farms. Currently, Kurt is riding the dragon on his way to that farm, and along the path, the dragon notices something on the ground, so they make a small detour. Meanwhile, Ulisha and Heir begin to return home in their carriage. Ulisha is happy that Heir is safe, but she still wonders why the demon from before cancelled the spell before it struck. Ulisha remembers the demon panicking when she saw Heir, so she might have cancelled the spell to avoid hitting her. But Ulisha will need more information before drawing any conclusions. She also needs to worry about the possibility that Heir might be able to use that teleportation magic at will. But that is already a problem for another day. So she decides to just appreciate the fact that she is still alive for the time being. A few moments later, Ulisha hears Kurt calling for her, so she stops the carriage and waits for him to land. She wonders why Kurt did not go straight home. Then she sees the unconscious demon on the back of the dragon and becomes filled with questions. Kurt explains that while he was riding the dragon he saw something, so they went down into the forest to investigate. and after searching for a while, Kurt found the demon woman unconscious on the ground because of the wounds that Ulisha had caused. At first, Kurt did not know what to do, because he wanted to treat her injuries so that she would survive. But at the same time, the demon could still be dangerous. Eventually, he decided to save her life, so he lights a small campfire to begin preparing a medicine. The demon regains consciousness at a certain point, but she still cannot move, so she asks Kurt what he is doing. Kurt explains that he is preparing a medicine for her, but she calls him a fool for showing mercy to an enemy. However, Kurt knows that she could have killed Ulisha and Akur if the spell had hit, but she chose to spare their lives, and that is already enough reason for him to save her. Kurt finishes preparing the medicine and throws it to her. At first, she refuses to take it, but Kurt reminds her that she will die if she continues like that, so she ends up taking the vial, turns her back, and drinks the medicine. However, as soon as the liquid goes down her throat, she realizes that something is wrong. Her wounds are healing, but now she can no longer move. And this happens because Kurt mixed a paralyzing agent into the medicine. He might even want to save her, but he is not naive enough to believe that the enemy will not attack him. This was an excellent foresight on Kurt's part, but he still believes that the demon is merely a dragon hunter. So his perception of the situation unfortunately has not improved. He wishes they could get along, just as happened with Wildegard when he was a child, and as soon as she hears the name of Wildegard, she begins to reach her hand out toward Kurt, but the effect of the medicine ends up causing her to faint. This brings us back to the present, but Ulisha wonders what kind of medicine Kurt prepared. Since demons are supposed to be immune to all poisons, they finally return to the mansion. Ulisha cannot believe that she is about to carry an unconscious demon inside the house. Meanwhile, Kurt tells Akur that she needs to apologize to Sheena, because she was likely very worried about her sudden disappearance. As soon as Sheena and Lee realize that Akur has returned, they run outside and embrace her, because they thought that something bad had happened to her. A few moments later, a man also comes out of the mansion, but Ulisha has never seen him before, so Lee introduces him as a new Atelier. The man introduces himself as Hakuto, and Kurt immediately believes that Lee is the new master of the Atelier, so Lee approaches to introduce herself. However, Lee realizes that something is wrong, because Kurt is the true master of the Atelier, so this guy must be an imposter. She asks Kurt to go inside and start preparing dinner while she takes care of all the luggage. And as soon as Kurt leaves, she tries to talk to Hakuto, but he suddenly pushes her against the carriage. She has no idea who he is, but it is clear that he has crossed the line, so instinctively she delivers a powerful kick toward his abdomen. However, her leg passes right through Hakuto's body. Ulisha then sees Lee smiling behind him, and finally understands everything. Hakuto is an illusion that Lee created using the sword that Kurt made, but Ulisha had no idea that the sword could create illusions of people who do not even exist. However, Ollie mentions that Hakuto is actually based on an adult version of Kurt. Lee dispels the illusion for now, and a second later a note from Mimiko falls from the sky. Ulisha picks it up and becomes excited, because Mimiko says she has finished analyzing Akur's DNA and will be there in 3 days to provide a report. The days pass and Mimiko finally arrives. Everyone is nervous to hear what she has to say about Akur, but Mimiko simply says she has no idea what Akur is. Ulisha asks why Mimiko even came there if she is only going to say she does not know, but there is a bit more to the story. When she analyzed the hair sample of Akur that Ulisha sent, it appeared identical to that of a common human. However, when Mimiko analyzed one of Akur's nails, she found traces of spatial magic in it. No normal human should be capable of using spatial magic, but there are records of this type of magic being used in the Age of the Gods. For now, this is the closest clue she has regarding Akur's origin, but although she looks and behaves like a normal girl, Akur is definitely not human. This frightens Mimiko, since a being such as Akur is present in the Atelier. For this reason, Mimiko considers casting a sealing curse on her so that she can no longer use teleportation magic and locking her in a research laboratory. However, Kurt refuses to let this happen. Mimiko asks why he is so against the idea, so Kurt asks if she is afraid of him. Mimiko knows that Kurt is capable of creating deadly weapons if he wanted to, but she also knows that he would never do anything to hurt others, so she is not afraid of him. In the same way, Kurt says he knows that whether Heir is human or not, she would never do anything to hurt him or anyone there. She went to check on the demon woman when they brought her in, likely because she was worried about her being unconscious. This only shows how kind Heir is, and at no point has she made Kurt or the others feel unsafe, so he is not going to let Mimiko take her away. Ulisha agrees with Kurt, and since Mimiko could not find any proof that Heir is a monster, at least they know she is not dangerous. Lee also does not want Mimiko to take Heir away, and since it is 3 against 1, Mimiko ends up giving in and agrees to let her stay. But there is still a matter she needs to resolve, so she asks to be taken to the demon Kurt captured to have a short conversation with her. Kurt says he kept the demon in the basement of the 2nd floor, so Mimiko heads in that direction. But before leaving, Kurt asks that she does not put the demon in prison, because she did not actually do any harm. Mimiko responds that she will be gentle with her, but in reality she has no intention of showing mercy, because these monsters are natural enemies of humanity. When she finds the demon, she injects her with something to make her wake up, and as soon as she opens her eyes, Mimiko begins asking questions. The first thing the demon does is use fire magic to attack Mimiko, but it is of no use because Kurt had already installed a barrier that nullifies all magic inside that room. Mimiko asks the creature to just cooperate and answer her questions so that she does not have to resort to violence, and the creature recognizes that she is lost. And according to the code of honor of the demons, the loser must obey the wishes of the winner. But Mimiko was not the one who defeated her, so she says she will only answer the questions of the boy who beat her, Kurt. Mimiko is not sure if she should listen to the creature, but bringing Kurt is faster than hours of torture. So she goes up and asks him to come down. When Kurt sees the creature, he asks how she is, and she says she is fine, apart from the fact that her arms are tied behind her back. Kurt apologizes for that, saying he would like to release her, but he was instructed not to untie her until they finish talking. The creature tells Kurt that her name is Soulflare, and asks if he truly knows Ildiger. This catches Kurt's attention, because he has wondered for a long time what happened to her. But no one knows who he is talking about, so Ulisha asks who this Ildiger is. Kurt explains that she is the daughter of a trader who frequently visited his village, and that she was a demon like Soulflare, so Kurt thinks perhaps they know each other. Soulflare asks Kurt if he remembers Ildiger using a griffin pendant, and now that Kurt thinks about it, he actually remembers seeing her with one, and that is already enough for Soulflare to believe that Kurt met Ildiger. She begs for Kurt to help because she needs to save Ilda, but Kurt has no idea what she is talking about. Soulflare explains that Ilda is currently being held prisoner under Tio's castle, and Kurt is shocked to learn that Tio would do something so horrible, so he asks Ulisha to help him rescue Ilda. However, Ulisha is not convinced, even if Soulflare truly wishes to save Ildiger. This does not explain why she targeted Heir, but there is a perfectly reasonable explanation for that. She was investigating Tio to find a way to save Ildiger in the castle, and in the process, she discovered that Tio was tracking Kurt and his friends. Therefore, Soulflare decided to follow Kurt and Ulisha to discover why Tio was so interested in them. And it was then that she saw Heir appear out of nowhere. She did not understand how the teleportation worked, but with that kind of power, she could rescue Ildiger instantly, so she attempted to kidnap Heir. This seems perfectly reasonable to Kurt, but Ulisha warns him not to let himself be convinced so easily, because Soulflare has not yet presented any proof. Soulflare says that if they want proof, then they can look at the pendant she is wearing. However, the pendant is well hidden in her cleavage, so Ulisha needs to search to find it. As soon as the pendant becomes visible, Kurt confirms that it is indeed the same one that Ildiger used to wear, so everything Soulflare said must be true. Soulflare received this pendant from Ildiger, and the reason she cancelled the attack against Ulisha at that time was not because of Heir. In reality, it was because the dagger Ulisha borrowed from Kurt had the same griffin symbol as Ildiger's pendant. Kurt remembers that he received this dagger as a gift from Ildiger, so all the evidence indicates that Soulflare is telling the truth. Thus, Mimiko decides that it is worth investigating. She tells Soulflare that they are going to save Ildiger for her, but only on the condition that she remains there. And in case she refuses to obey Mimiko, Mimiko asks Kurt to tell Soulflare to stay put. Kurt promises Soulflare that they will bring Ildiger back, but in the middle of the conversation, Acure suddenly appears in front of Kurt. Kurt scolds Acure because it is rude to teleport in front of people like that, so Acure apologizes, but teleporting is very fun for her. Kurt then approaches Mimiko, and even though it was he who said he wanted to save Ildiger, he has no idea how to do it, so he asks her for help. Mimiko tells Kurt that this is not a problem, since everyone is there to help, but Kurt still feels a bit discouraged because he cannot do anything to help them. A short time later, Mimiko brings some maps of Tio's mansion so that they can discover where Ildiger might be, and Ulisha is truly impressed that Mimiko managed to obtain the floor plan of Tio's mansion so quickly. In fact, Mimiko had already been investigating Tio for some time, and according to her agents, there is a room in the mansion that only Tio can enter. He was seen taking food to that room, so it is possible that Ildiger is imprisoned there. Soulflare also noticed this room while spying on Tio, but unfortunately, she was unable to enter. Mimiko asked her agents to try to open the door, but even a master of lockpicking would take several hours to succeed. However, if they cannot pick the lock, Lee suggests making Tio open the door himself. She can use one of her illusions to make it appear that someone managed to enter the room, and thus Tio would be forced to unlock the door to investigate. The plan seems very good, but they need to find a way to make Tio fall for it. Lee has already thought of this as well, so she intends to have Hakuto organize a 3-day festival as the master, and this will be the perfect excuse to get close to Tio. However, Ulisha wonders what they should do regarding Kurt, since she still does not trust Soulflare enough to leave him alone with her. Lee says they can simply take Kurt along, giving the excuse that he wants to see the festival, and when they have the chance, they will hide to save Ildiger. Now that the plan has been finalized, Lee and Ulisha begin to dress up, because going to a festival with Kurt would practically be a date. I can see that this boy is going to secure a harem. They are going to execute the infiltration plan on the 3rd day of the festival, so they will have 2 days to have fun with Kurt, and the two of them play rock, paper, scissors to decide who goes first. Lee wins, so she begins to taunt Ulisha to rub the victory in her face, but Ulisha makes her promise that she will not do anything indecent with Kurt, and both Mimiko and Soulflare watch everything completely confused. On the 1st day of the festival, Kurt and Lee go out together with Acure, and Lee is having a lot of fun. While walking, Lee sees a shop that sells spineless cacti, and it is a unique product since you can cut the top and drink the cactus juice. As Lee seems excited to try it, Kurt decides to buy some. He gives one to Acure and another to Lee, but he does not buy one for himself, perhaps because he thinks he is poor even though he has millions of gold coins in his account. His self-esteem is so low that he does not think he deserves to drink a whole cactus, so he simply asks for a few of the leftovers. Acure feels bad that Kurt did not buy a drink for himself, so she offers to share hers with him, and Kurt is touched by the kind gesture. He tastes the cactus juice, and he finds it truly sweet. Kurt enjoys it very much, but he does not want to finish Acure's juice, so he returns the juice to her. Lee then asks if Kurt wants to taste her juice, and at first, she was only trying to be kind, but then she realizes that Kurt's lips touch the edge of the cactus, and all of her passionate thoughts kick into gear. She bites the spot where Kurt's lips touched, and afterward, she puts the cactus in her bag to take home. I admit this is quite suspicious. Kurt has no idea why she began to act so strangely, so he asks why she is putting the cactus in the bag. But sincerely, I think it is better if he does not even know. They continue walking through the festival, and Lee remembers that Kurt traveled across the entire country when he was part of that group of adventurers, and so she is certain that he has seen many festivals. Technically, she is correct, but he was always responsible for maintenance or guarding the carriage in the stables, so he only saw the festival from a cold and dark room. Lee says that this sounds horrible, but Kurt says he did not mind, because someone like him who was only good for performing simple tasks did not deserve to enjoy a festival. However, he always wanted to enjoy a real festival. So Lee promises to make this the most fun one for Kurt. And when they finish having fun, she will finally confess her feelings to him. The three of them continue walking until a stall owner calls Kurt over to play a game, so he would have the chance to win a gift for his lovely wife and daughter. All he needs to do is weigh exactly 1 kilogram of beans, and normally this would be an almost impossible task. But Kurt takes a handful of beans, and after weighing them for a second, completes the challenge on the first try and wins a prize after a long day of games at the festival. Lee asks Kurt to go with her to the park to get away from the crowd. She has prepared the ideal setting, and she is sure that he had a lot of fun at the festival today, so he must be in a good mood. And this would be the perfect moment to declare herself. However, when she approaches Kurt, he appears truly sad. Then she realizes it is because the park has a clear view of Tio's castle, and the sight must have reminded Kurt that Ildiger is imprisoned inside. She asks if he is worried about Ildiger, but he says that is not the problem. Everyone has already promised that they will save her, so he believes they will succeed, but it hurts to know that he was unable to do anything to help. Lee points out that Kurt saved her from her curse, and that he also built that enormous mansion for all of them, but Kurt thinks none of that matters because he is convinced that any random person could have done the same. Lee wants to tell Kurt that his abilities far surpass those of common people, but he would likely think she is lying, so instead, she tells Kurt that she loves him. Kurt is shocked to hear this suddenly, but Lee truly means it, and she is not the only person who feels this way. Ulisha, Mimiko, Sheena, and all the others at the Atelier also care deeply about Kurt, so he should not feel like a burden to them just because he cannot help save Ildiger. Hearing this cheers Kurt up greatly, but then Akir calls for him because she is starving, so Kurt goes to her to get something to eat. Lee was a bit disappointed because it seems he only sees her as a friend, but she is fine with it since she made Kurt feel better. So next time, she will ensure that she conveys her feelings correctly. As for what happened after Ulisha's sword was broken the last time, she asked Kurt to make a new weapon for her. So before the festival began, he got in touch with the famous dwarven blacksmith and returned to that mine that Ulisha owns. In a short time, Kurt managed to find mithril and adamantite simply scattered around, and the dwarf was shocked at how easy it was for Kurt. But when the time comes to forge the sword, he refuses to believe that Kurt can actually do it this way. Mithril is notoriously difficult to work with, and Kurt is basically melting it in a pot as if it were nothing. Even though he is suspicious, he still agrees to let Kurt use his forge, and to his surprise, Kurt creates a masterpiece blade in less than an hour. The blacksmith's jaw drops for a moment, but after processing what just happened, he decides to set out on a journey to improve his blacksmithing skills so he can become as good as Kurt. Ulisha becomes very excited upon receiving the sword, as it is the first gift Kurt has given to her. And back to the present. It is time for her to depart for her date with him. Kurt and Ulisha walk through the city as the second day of the festival begins, and since Akir is still tired from all the fun of the previous day, they decide to let her sleep a little longer. This works perfectly for Ulisha, as it means she will have Kurt all to herself, and she already has several fun locations where she plans to take him. However, suddenly, she hears a commotion, and when she looks, she sees a shop, with a father and daughter being robbed by some delinquents. But Ulisha is perfectly fine with letting them be robbed, as she does not want to interrupt her date with Kurt, so she pretends she saw nothing. But before she realizes it, Kurt has already stepped forward to help the family. Kurt approaches the stall, telling the thugs to stop immediately what they are doing. The thugs tell him to mind his own business, but Kurt insists they explain what is happening there. Then the thugs say they do not like the flavor of that man's meat buns, so they are destroying the place so that no one else has to taste such garbage. Kurt thinks it is rude to call someone's hard work garbage, so he takes one of the meat buns and says he would like to purchase it. He takes a bite and praises the man's excellent choice of meat and preparation. The thugs do not like Kurt spoiling their fun, so one of them pushes him. And since Kurt has no combat skills, he stumbles backward. It is at this moment that Ulisha finally decides to intervene, telling the thugs that Kurt is part of the Atelier. As soon as the thugs hear this, they begin to reconsider. because they know that the 8 Leers hold great power in the kingdom, so they flee. Kurt then goes to check on the man and discovers that the thugs broke some of his bones, so he becomes very worried. Ulisha tries to tell Kurt that a few sips of his medicine should be enough to heal the broken bones, but Kurt still believes that everything he makes is mediocre, so he insists on taking the man to a hospital and runs off before Ulisha can stop him. She becomes extremely disappointed, because in this way her date with Kurt will be ruined. But she hears the man's daughter begin to cry and realizes she might be worrying too much about the wrong thing. At that moment, Ulisha notices one of Mimiko's agents nearby, disguised as a melon seller. So she goes to him to see if he has any information. The agent tells Ulisha that there will be a cooking competition later, and that Meat Bun Stall was planning to participate. But the current champion, Gargle Restaurant, does not want to lose its title of Best Food Stall, so they hired thugs to destroy the stall. Ulisha realizes that this means her date was ruined because of the idiots from Gargle Restaurant, but since they already chased away the thugs, she is certain that she can continue the date when Kurt returns. Then when Kurt returns, he tells Ulisha that the man will stay in the hospital until tomorrow, so he asked Kurt to look after the shop and his daughter for him. Ulisha's chances of having a normal date are officially over, so she decides to channel her frustration into anger, swearing that she will crush Gargle Restaurant for ruining her plans. Kurt has no idea what Ulisha is talking about, so she explains that there will be a cooking competition later that day, and she wants to help the bun stall win. However, the little girl says there is no chance of winning the competition now, because those thugs threw away all the meat bun dough, so there is nothing left to sell, let alone to participate in the competition. Ulisha tells the girl that everything will be fine, because she and Kurt are going to help her. She asks Kurt if he can make some delicious meat buns, and it is Kurt, after all, so obviously he can. But Kurt will not be the one making the buns, since his would be too good. So instead, Ulisha plans to have Kurt teach Luna how to make them, so that she can continue making the buns after they are gone. Luna promises to do her best to make her father proud. So Ulisha stands up saying that they are going to remake those buns and win the competition. But first they will need to obtain new ingredients. So she asks Kurt if there is anything he needs her to fetch. Kurt tells her to buy some spineless cacti at the nearby stalls, and afterwards she should get the bag of beans he won at the festival yesterday. And while she does that, he says he will start working by digging right there. Ulisha was in agreement with everything, until the moment he started talking about digging holes. She reminds Kurt that this plaza belongs to the Lord, but Kurt says that is not a problem, since he can dig fast enough not to cause inconvenience to anyone. However, that was not what worried Ulisha. Kurt then asks if she knows where he could borrow a shovel, but Ulisha insists that he should ask for permission before performing any kind of construction on someone else's land. On the other side of the city, Gargoyle is offering the judges of the cooking contest one of his delicious specialties, and they praise him for his extremely tasteful food. Gargoyle is satisfied because he is certain he will win this year's contest, partly because he somewhat bribed the judges before the contest began, and also because he has already done everything to ensure his rivals were destroyed. However, to his chagrin, he soon hears people talking about some delicious buns they just bought and begins to grow worried. So he decides to go there to see what is happening. He is certain that he ordered those thugs to destroy the bun stall, but to his surprise, he discovers that the stall is not only still there, but business is better than ever. There is even some kind of new spa structure next to it, and Gargoyle has no idea when that was built. The judges soon arrive at the stall because they have been hearing many good things about the buns there. Gargoyle panics because he does not want the judges to taste those buns, so he tries to convince them that the buns must be spoiled because the filling inside them is completely black. However, Luna interrupts him mid-sentence and brings one of the buns to the judges. She informs them that although the filling of the buns is black, it still has a great flavor. She explains that it was made with boiled beans and ripened cactus nectar, giving it a sweet and savory taste. Her vivid description leaves the judges intrigued, so everyone becomes excited to try them. And as soon as they put it in their mouths, They can understand why everyone likes them so much, and, as a bonus, the buns cost only a single copper coin each, despite being very flavorful. Gargoyle does not believe the buns can be that good, so he decides to try one himself and discovers that they really are as good as they say. The judges ask Luna if there is some kind of secret to making them so soft. Then Ulisha approaches, explaining that the temporary proprietor ended up getting a bit carried away with the preparation. He said that to obtain a better result, the buns need to be boiled in water with sodium bicarbonate, so they use water drawn directly from a hot spring. Gargoyle refuses to believe it and accuses Ulisha of lying, because he knows there is no hot spring there. But Ulisha says the temporary proprietor simply dug one that very same day. Gargoyle still does not think this is possible. But then Ulisha says that Kurt is part of the new 8-layer and, suddenly, it seems much more plausible to him. However, he is still furious because his chances of winning the cooking contest have been ruined. So he threatens to report them for building on Tio's land without permission. Even members of the 8-layer can be punished for such a crime. But Ulisha had already thought of that, which is why she asked Lee to request permission directly from Tio. And with the third princess officially supporting the stall, there is nothing Gargoyle can do to stop them, even though they had to agree to hand over the hot spring to the city administration as part of the deal. So Kurt transformed it into a foot spa as a new tourist attraction. Gargoyle is losing his mind, because it should not be possible for a small bun stall to have so many connections. However, he still has a trick up his sleeve. He pulls one of the judges aside and reminds him of the bribe money he will receive if he helps Gargoyle win the contest. However, the bean buns are simply too delicious, so the judge tells Gargoyle that he can keep the money, because he will not provide a poor evaluation for that stall. At that moment, Gargoyle sees the thugs he hired hidden around the corner and runs to them, telling them to hurry up and destroy the stall. He even promises to get them out of prison should they be arrested. But suddenly he hears the voice of a girl and the thugs disappear to reveal it. The real thugs have already been arrested and thrown in jail for destruction of property. And Gargoyle has already admitted that he hired them to commit all that destruction. But that alone would not be enough to keep him imprisoned for long. Fortunately, Lee investigated and discovered that Gargoyle is a supplier for Taken's personal chef and had been adding drugs to the food to make people addicted, which is extremely illegal. So now they have every right to take him into custody. Gargoyle realizes he has been caught, but refuses to go down like that. So he pulls a knife and lunges at Lee to escape. This does not go very well for him, and within a few seconds, he is pinned to the ground by two of Mimiko's agents. Lee then says that he has just made his own situation much worse, because Lee is the third princess and Takala added treason to the charges. Gargoyle is then led away, and it is crazy to think that all of this happened because he wanted to win a silly contest. Let this be a lesson. After Gargoyle is taken away, Lee takes a moment to tease Ulisha, saying that she did not manage to have a real date with Kurt. But Ulisha is happy just to have succeeded in making Luna and Kurt smile today. Later that day, Tio is informed that Gargoyle has been arrested, and he is shocked because Gargoyle was the castle's only food supplier. He asks what Gargoyle did in the hope of getting him out of prison, but his assistant informs him that Gargoyle attacked Princess Lee at the festival today, and there is nothing Tio can do to save him after such a foolish mistake, so he gives up on trying to release him. However, Tio still has a major problem, because Lee is scheduled to come for tea tomorrow, and there is no way to serve the princess if his food supplier is in prison. Tio's assistant then suggests a solution and proposes hiring a local bun stall. In this way, they would prepare the snacks for the tea. As they were quite a success during today's festival, Tio does not have much choice, so he agrees to hire the stall as his new food supplier in preparation for Lee's visit tomorrow. But speaking of Lee, she has been acting very strangely lately. She appeared before him out of nowhere today and personally requested a construction permit, saying she would return for tea the following day along with the 8-layer. Tio is worried that she might have discovered what he is doing here, but none of that matters as long as he manages to meet the 8-layer and convey his deepest desire. The next morning, Lee and the others are preparing for their plan, the goal of which is to save Ildiger. Heading toward the secret room behind the kitchen, They do not know for certain if Ildegard is there, but it is their best guess. Kurt tells everyone that he is going to help Luna with her stall today, since she ended up receiving a very large order, but this definitely should not affect their plan. After Kurt leaves, Lee and Ulisha review the details of the plan. Basically, Lee will create an illusion of herself and Hakuto to meet with Tio, and eventually they will trick him into unlocking the secret room so they can discover what is inside. Or at least that was how it was supposed to happen. But on the way they receive a note from one of Mimiko's spies, saying that Kurt and Luna were hired by Tio to serve today's tea, and he is currently in the kitchen right next to the secret room. Kurt initially only wanted to help Luna with the shop during the day, but when he arrived there, he found her talking to some guards from Tio's mansion. They tell her that the Lord would like to order 100 buns from this shop in preparation for a special event he planned for today, which would not be a problem. But the Lord also requested that the chef come to his mansion, and the little girl cannot afford to leave her shop unsupervised. Kurt does not want her to lose today's business, so he offers to make the 100 buns and go to the mansion in her place so that she can stay there. And while he is making the buns, he offers some samples to the guards, as a thank you for being so polite about the whole situation. The guards are grateful for the treat, so they all begin to eat, and as soon as they eat the buns, their taste buds are taken to paradise, and they faint from so much flavor while still standing. Fortunately, it takes Kurt only a few minutes to finish the 100 buns, so he heads out and awakens the guards so they can all go to the mansion. Upon arrival, Kurt is in disbelief to discover that the buns he made are going to be served to the princess of the kingdom, and he still has no idea that Lee is the princess, so he becomes worried, thinking he might be executed for disrespectfully serving mere buns to royalty. However, the assistant tells him that he has no one to worry about, because this was Tio's request. He also asks Kurt to wait until Tio's meeting with the princess concludes, in case any of them wish to meet him. Meanwhile, Lee's meeting with Tio is going well so far, but Ulisha needs to stay nearby in case something goes wrong, so she cannot keep an eye on Kurt. She only hopes that he does not do anything dangerous while she is not there. But as she says this, Kurt is busy thinking about doing something dangerous. He and Akir are sitting in the kitchen, and he is staring directly at the door that supposedly keeps Ildegard imprisoned, so it is difficult for him to stay still. Akir notices that Kurt is behaving strangely, so she asks what is wrong, and Kurt explains that one of his friends might be behind that door, but it is locked, so it makes him anxious. As soon as Akir hears this, she offers to take Kurt inside, and before Kurt even has the chance to respond, she grabs him and teleports into the room. Kurt is surprised when he realizes that Akir teleported him past the door, as he had no idea she could teleport other people with her. However, even though he is already inside the secret room, Kurt does not want to interfere with Ulisha and Lee's plan, so he asks Akir to teleport him back outside. Nevertheless, Akir says that she cannot do that. Kurt assumes there must be some sort of cooldown on her teleportation ability, which means he will be stuck there for a while. At that moment, Kurt hears a woman's voice coming from the door next to him. Believing it might be Ildegard, he immediately takes a pin and begins to pick the lock. The lock is extremely complicated and was designed to be impossible to open, but Kurt manages to overcome it faster than a master locksmith and opens the door. However, even though he finds a woman inside, he immediately realizes that it is not Ildegard. It is a very elderly lady. Back at the meeting with Tio, he says he wants to get straight to the point, as he has a request to make of Hakuto. He asks Lee to leave, since it is a private matter, so the clone leaves the room. But the real Lee is still hidden behind Hakuto. She is anxious to discover what kind of scheme Tio has up his sleeve, and as soon as Tio believes he is alone with the supposed master of the Atelier, he asks Hakuto if he knows anything about eternal youth. Meanwhile, the young lady is surprised to see the young boy there, as she does not receive many visitors, but she is happy to see some new faces. Akir approaches the woman and asks if she is sick or something similar, and the lady says she is. In fact, she has not had much of an appetite lately. But then Akir offers her one of the buns Kurt made, and when the lady eats it, She truly appreciates the food. She is impressed by the flavors, especially because her taste buds no longer function. Seeing her so cheerful gives Kurt the impression that she is not actually an elderly lady. He asks why she has this aged appearance, and the lady is surprised that he noticed so quickly. She assumes Kurt must be some sort of powerful mage, but Kurt says he is just a helper at the atelier. The lady is surprised to see that Kurt's position is so low, as she thinks he appears to be very capable. But regardless of that, she asks him for help, wanting to save the demon-held prisoner beneath that room. As soon as Kurt hears the name Ildiger, he says he will rescue her. But since Ildiger is being kept below that room, he will need something to dig with. However, he did not bring any tools with him, so he decides to take a piece of old bread and carve it into a shovel. The elderly lady becomes incredibly confused and thinks that Kurt might be insane or something of the sort. Before he proceeds, she tells him to wait, because she knows an easier way to reach the basement. Upstairs, Lee is surprised to discover that Tio is after eternal youth, but she needs more information, so she has Hakuto ask for details. He knows that it is not easy to achieve eternal youth. However, races such as elves and demons live several times longer than humans, so there must be a way to recreate the effect and make humans live longer as well. In the past, experiments were conducted to extend human life by implanting elf or demon cells into humans, but these experiments came with severe side effects and were considered inhuman, so they were strictly prohibited in the kingdom. That being said, after everything Tio heard about the medicine produced by the new atelier, he assumed that the master of the atelier could create a drug capable of granting eternal youth without side effects. Lee assumes that Tio must be planning to use cells from Ildiger's body for his eternal youth experiments, but there is a part that does not fit for her, so she uses Hakuto to ask him why he is in such a hurry to acquire the potion of eternal youth. He is not exactly on the brink of death, and he must know that using demon cells goes against the country's policies. Yet he would still be willing to risk his status to acquire immortality immediately. Tio is questioned about whom he intends to use the immortality potion on if he acquires it. But Tio begins to defend himself and says that it does not matter who it is for. All that matters is that he needs it. Lee realizes that Tio is not going to reveal that part of the plan, so she decides to proceed with the illusion and creates two thieves nearby. Then Ulisher runs in to collaborate and tells Tio that two thieves were spotted in the mansion and have just run toward the kitchen as if they were looking for something. Tio immediately panics, getting up and asking Ulisher to take care of Hakuto and Lee because he needs to check on something. Tio then runs toward the secret room, while an invisible Lee follows him closely. She is certain that Ildiger must be the secret Tio was trying to hide, but when Tio finally opens the door, she is shocked to hear him call out to someone named Falmi. Tio panics further upon realizing that Falmi is not there, so he worries that the thieves who broke in might have found her. Lee is truly confused, because Falmi is the name of Tio's daughter, but Lee thought she was dead. Tio runs to the basement to search for Falmi, and while he is away, Lee approaches the bed to investigate a little. She uses a spell to enhance her senses and smells Kurt's scent in that room. But she also finds a long gray hair and knows it does not belong to Kurt, so it must belong to Falmi. There are many factors here that she had not anticipated. Before doing anything else, she plans to go back and discuss this with Ulisha. Meanwhile, Falmi has just led Kurt and Akir to the room where Ilda is being held. When Kurt opens the door, he finds Ilda trapped within a large magic circle. He calls out to her, and when Ilda opens her eyes, she is shocked to see that Kurt is actually there. Kurt asks her to wait a moment while he undoes the magic circle, but Falmi says it is not necessary, as the circle can be turned off by a control switch. After Ilda is released, Kurt runs to check if she is hurt anywhere, but Ilda says she is perfectly fine and Kurt is relieved. Then he notices that she looks exactly like the same person from when they met 10 years ago. He tells her that she has not changed at all since the last time they saw each other. But then Ilda strikes him in the face because it is his fault she stayed this way. When Kurt fed her the medicine he made, it caused her to stop aging completely, so she will have the appearance of a 10-year-old child for the rest of her life. Kurt apologizes because he might have overdone it a bit with the rainbow flower while making the medicine. But that is not all. Shortly after, Kurt did something else to her. He simply left the village and let her deal with everything alone. She demands that Kurt compensate her immediately, but Heir scolds Ilda for hitting her father. When Ilda realizes that Kurt has a daughter, she becomes even more irritated. Why did Kurt have a child with someone else while leaving her like this? Kurt explains that it is a misunderstanding, because although Heir might be his daughter, he did not have any actual relationship to produce a baby. She simply came out of an egg he was looking after. This sounds absurd, but Ilda has already seen the kind of things that happen in Kurt's village, so it is not hard to believe. Regardless, Ilda is hungry, so she asks Kurt if he has anything to eat, but the only food Kurt brought is this piece of hard bread. Ilda tells Kurt it is fine, but when Kurt says the bread is hard, he truly meant it. Why can Ilda not even take a bite? At that moment, Falmi approaches Ilda and asks if it is true that Kurt is the one who made the medicine that gave her eternal youth. Ilda confirms it. She asks Kurt if he could make the same medicine again for Falmi, but unfortunately, the medicine requires rainbow flowers, and Kurt has not seen those flowers for a long time. This is disappointing to hear, so Ilda apologizes to Falmi for not being able to help her with her condition. But Falmi says it is not her fault. Kurt is shocked to hear Ilda call the elderly lady Falmi, because he recognizes that name as Tio's daughter, but everyone knows that Tio's daughter is dead. Falmi explains that her death was faked to keep her condition hidden, and Tio has been shedding tears while watching his daughter age rapidly with each passing day. But since Kurt could already perceive that she was not actually an elderly lady, Falmi sees no reason to go deeper into explanations. However, Kurt is a fool when it comes to picking up clues, so he has no idea what Falmi is talking about. Falmi continues speaking, but Kurt does not pay attention because he is trying to understand what Falmi meant. So he recalls the details. Tio became very sad seeing Falmi age day after day, and he imprisoned the eternally young Ildiger in this secret room. The conclusion seems obvious, but then Kurt remembers a conversation he had with the members of Sakura when he asked if they knew why Tio might have imprisoned Ilda. They joked that perhaps it was some kind of fetish. Kurt discards all other theories and decides that this must be correct. A moment later, Tio appears, and he is relieved to see her well. He then notices Kurt and asks if he is the thief who broke in there, but Kurt denies it and changes the subject, telling Tio that what he is doing there is wrong. Tio becomes defensive and tells Kurt that he would not understand, but then Kurt accuses him of having grown tired of Falmi because she aged and of going after Ilda in her place because she is young. Everyone realizes that Kurt truly does not understand anything that is happening. Kurt then accuses Tio of being attracted to children, but Tio interrupts him immediately, saying that although he may have done some unethical things, such as kidnapping Ilda for the sake of his daughter, he absolutely does not feel attraction toward children. However, once Kurt starts creating a narrative in his head, all logic goes out the window. Everyone is confused and wonders how Kurt could have reached such a conclusion. To convince Tio to stop being attracted to children, Kurt asks him to remember how it was when Falmi was born. Tio does indeed have fond memories of that day. Falmi was the precious treasure that he and his late wife cared for with so much affection. Since that day, he swore he would live his life for Falmi's sake, even if it meant giving up his own life for her. Kurt is about to speak again, but before he can say anything else, Ilda strikes him with a paralysis spell, making him shut his mouth. She then asks Falmi if she is sure she wants to go through with this, after everything Tio just said. But although Falmi still cares for her father, she is certain that this is what she desires, so she asks Ilda to kill Tio. Tio runs to the secret room, because he does not want to die without first finding a way to save Falmi. But as soon as he leaves, he is confronted by Lee and Ulisha. Lee tells Tio that she knows what he is trying to do, and that she knows Falmi was affected by the aging syndrome. There is no known cure for this syndrome, and even if the curse is somehow broken, the victim will not return to their original age. This is why Tio was trying to create a medicine to stop Falmi from aging, even using Ilda's demon cells. Tio admits that everything he did was to ensure that Falmi stopped aging so rapidly. But even though he followed all the instructions given to him, he did not find the secret of eternal youth and did not get any closer to breaking Falmi's curse. Now everyone is trying to hinder him, so if things have reached this point, he is willing to sacrifice his soul to summon a demon that can help Falmi. Tio throws a magic crystal on the floor, which activates a circle already inscribed on the pavement. He calls upon the demon to manifest, but strangely nothing happens. Tio is perplexed, as he knows he set everything up correctly, and activating the magic circle should have channeled the power of the ley lines beneath the castle to summon a powerful demon. However, when Lee hears him mention the ley lines, she informs him that when the hot spring was built yesterday, the flow of those lines was diverted because Kurt dug a bit too deep. Tio is shocked, thinking that Lee's plan had been set up in advance to prevent the demon's summoning. But in reality, it was just a coincidence. At that moment, Ilda comes out of the secret room, and Tio begins to panic because he knows what she intends to do. As soon as Lee and Ulisha see her, they realize she must be a friend of Kurt's, so they ask where he is. But Ilda says she just made him rest for a bit downstairs because she does not want him to see what she is about to do. Ilda then takes her sword and points it at Tio, which shocks Ulisha and Lee. They ask if she intends to kill him. Ilda responds that she needs to kill Tio, because although his actions may have been to save his daughter, if his desperation continues to grow, he might one day succeed in summoning a demon. And if that happens, his soul will not be the only thing lost. Tio says he only wants to ensure that Falmi can have a normal life, whatever the cost. And that is exactly why Falmi asked Ilda to kill him, because she could never bear the guilt of him putting others in danger just to save her. Ilda is about to attack Tio when suddenly Falmi appears and screams for her to stop. Everyone turns to her and, to everyone's surprise, Falmi is back to normal, saying she was cured by the buns Kurt made. This is a sentence Tio never imagined hearing, but he is not going to complain, as he is just happy she has been cured. Meanwhile, in the basement, the paralysis spell Ilda placed on Kurt begins to fade, so he can speak a little but still cannot move his body. Needing Akir's help, Kurt asks her to reach into his bag and take out the vial that is inside. Akir does so, and then Kurt asks her to give him one of the pills from the vial. As soon as Akir feeds him the pill, Kurt regains full control of his body and is ready to go upstairs to help her, even without understanding anything about the situation. Meanwhile, upstairs, Tio is still embracing Falmi, but Lee calls for his attention, because there is still much to discuss regarding what has occurred. Tio already knows what is coming, so he turns to Lee and says he is ready to accept whatever punishment she has for him. Lee tells Tio that he attempted to summon a demon and also imprisoned a demon without permission, both serious crimes even for a noble such as himself. Therefore, he would likely face imprisonment or even execution for his action. Falmi intervenes, asking Lee to reconsider, because she says Tio is not a bad person. Everything he did was for her sake. So if someone must be punished, Falmi asks to be punished in her father's place. However, Lee tells them that in reality, she does not intend to punish anyone. As a member of the royal family, her duty is to report actions like Tio's. But considering that he did everything out of love for his daughter, Lee is willing to pretend none of this happened, as long as Tio promises to work for the good of the Atelier from now on. Tio remains grateful for Lee's mercy and agrees to all of her conditions. Now all they need to do is ask Kurt to erase the demon summoning circle, so they can leave all this mess behind. But before that happens, a man appears saying that they are not going to have a happy ending. Ilda recognizes him as a man named Scripter, and Tio says he was the one who brought Ildiger to him. He was the one who taught him how to draw the summoning circle. Scripter believed that as soon as the demons allied with Ilda discovered she was in Tio's castle, they would attack and start a war to find her. But to his disappointment, none of them took any aggressive action. Ilda says she warned all her allies in advance not to initiate fights against humans, as she knew Scripter might try something like that, and it seems the warning was effective. Scripter hates seeing that all of his plans for chaos have failed recently. He even made an effort to deceive the bishop of the church, making him try to assassinate Lee. But his plan was interrupted by someone's interference, and now his plans are being frustrated again. Even without him knowing exactly how they managed to dissipate the aging curse he placed upon Falme. As soon as Tio hears these words, he realizes that Scriptor was the one who cursed his daughter. He becomes so enraged that he immediately attacks Scriptor, but his punch is stopped by a force field around him. Lee joins the attack, but her strike is also stopped by the force field. However, since Ilda's sword was made by Kurt, it is considered a holy weapon and possesses so much power that it begins to crack Scriptor's shield. Scriptor is shocked, as he did not expect to encounter someone wielding a holy sword, so he will have to retreat soon. But before leaving, he has one last trick to play. He pulls out a small vial with black liquid. As soon as Ilda sees the vial, she screams for everyone to take that vial from Scriptor at any cost. Unfortunately, it was already too late. The demon is now being summoned, and by chance, it is the same great demon that attacked them before. Ulisha does not understand how he is still alive, as she was certain she had killed him the last time. The demon explains that demons are spiritual beings, so it is very difficult to actually kill him. But he admits that his previous defeat cost him centuries of his magic reserves. Lee tries to draw her magic sword while the demon is distracted, but he already knows the power of the sword and strikes her down before she can use it. Hilda launches a fireball at the creature, and Ulisha charges with her holy sword, while Lee begins to cast light magic. However, before any of them could complete their attacks, the demon shoots arrows of black energy into their arms. Ulisha cannot believe that he managed to react to their attacks, even after being hit by Ilda's fireball, but the demon explains that such spells are useless against his magic barrier. The only thing that could actually hurt him is the holy sword, but with Ulisha's arm injured, she can no longer use it. And since the creature exhausted a large part of his magic reserves in the last summoning, he plans to replenish those reserves by making the humans suffer at his hand, which will cement his superiority over them in their minds and will restore his magic. However, this also means that if Lee and Ulisha manage to shake the demon's confidence, he will lose power and disappear. But that is much easier said than done, as he is twisting the arrows in their shoulders. Lee tries to hide her pain, so the demon does not benefit from her suffering, but it will not last long at this rate. The demon observes Lee and Ulisha struggling to keep a serious expression. But suddenly Kurt appears looking quite calm after seeing the demon lord. Almost even too calm. He says it has been centuries since the last time he saw one, so he thought they had all become extinct. On the other hand, it is never easy to completely rid oneself of pests. Provocative insults such as calling the demon an insect are a good way to shake his confidence. But Kurt is not calling the demon a pest to be offensive. In his village, he had to deal with demon lords frequently, so he truly sees the demon as nothing more and nothing less than an inconvenient insect. The demon takes offense at Kurt daring to speak to him in such a manner and launches a fireball at the boy. However, before the fireball strikes Kurt, Akir teleports it, causing it to hit the demon himself. Kurt thanks Akir for the help, but she will not be able to use teleportation for a while, so Ulisha will have to protect Kurt. She positions herself in front of him as the demon launches another fireball. She prepares to use the magic/technique. She had failed to execute it against Soulflare a few days prior, but this time, for Kurt's sake, she allows herself to try again. Ulisha's sword makes contact with the spell and attempts to cut it, but unfortunately, she fails once more. However, since she is using the sword made by Kurt, something different happens and the demon's flames are absorbed by the blade. Ulisha is not sure what just occurred, but she simply follows through with the situation and fires the flames back at the demon. He begins to lose his footing because he is becoming overwhelmed. Even if he is to be defeated, he intends to take one of them with him. So he uses his special move and attempts to pierce Ilda through the chest with his arms, but upon striking her, his arms shatter. The demon asks how this is possible, since nothing should be hard enough to block his attack. Then Ilda pulls out that bun Kurt made earlier. Somehow, Kurt managed to make it so hard that it could likely survive an atomic bomb. It seems completely absurd, but the demon realizes it is not the first time he has experienced something like this. So he asks Kurt if he comes from Hesh village, and as soon as Kurt confirms it, The demon says no and disintegrates. Perhaps he does not wish to deal with the madness that Kurt is capable of. After the demon disappears, Kurt explains to the others that for some reason his village was frequently attacked by demon lords, so they had to create all sorts of countermeasures against them. And eventually all the demon lords were exterminated, considering that a piece of bread made by Kurt managed to block a demon's ultimate attack. Ulisha cannot imagine what kinds of countermeasures the residents of Kurt's village were capable of creating. Everything seems to be resolving well, but suddenly a black circle appears in the middle of the magic circle. It begins to pull things inside. Ilda tells everyone that the effects of the drug Scriptor used must have worn off, but no one knows what that means. Ilda explains that the black vial Scriptor poured over the summoning circle was a drug that allows for the activation of magic circles without the immediate need for mana or souls. However, when the circle's function ends, the vial begins to collect energy to fulfill the requirements, and considering the summoning circle used, it likely will not stop until it has gathered energy equivalent to 100 souls. The worst part is that there is nothing they can do to prevent it without sacrificing people. At this rate, it will be necessary to sacrifice everyone in the castle. And then one of the castle attendants enters carrying a box full of the buns Kurt made, and coincidentally there are exactly 100 of them. The vial devours these buns and simply leaves afterward. But the arrival of the attendant with the buns was not just a coincidence. In fact, it was Mimiko who sent him to take Kurt's buns and bring them there. She had a feeling that those buns would be sufficient to satisfy the vial. But thinking about it, that is truly frightening, because if Kurt's buns can be used as sacrifices, he technically could summon as many demon lords as he wished and force them to obey his orders, perhaps in a second season. In other news, following the events of that night, Tio announced Falmi's survival to the population, and everyone was immensely happy to learn that she was well. After a brief interrogation conducted by Mimiko, Ilda and Soulflare were released and returned together to their homeland. As for the bun stall, it has been doing very well. As Mimiko expected, the more people who know Kurt, the more influence he exerts over the world, so she will need to keep a much closer eye on him. Later, Kurt and the others return to the Atelier, and it seems that Kurt has received a knighthood for his actions. Sheena asked him how the commissioning ceremony went, and Kurt said that he was very nervous the entire time. Firstly, he did not think he deserved any recognition, as he believed that Lee and Ulisha were the ones truly responsible for defeating the demon. However, Tio was certain that Kurt was the hero who saved him that day, so he granted him the honorary title of knight. Ulisha also received the title of baroness, and the Atelier is now officially under Tio's protection, so that no noble can interfere. As Ilda and Soulflare were traveling, she looked at the gift that Kurt had given her before departing. He wanted to give her a rainbow flower, but unfortunately they are extinct, so instead he made a flower out of gold and orichalcum. Ilda was shocked to realize that Kurt had made a gift using one of the most valuable metals on the planet. Kurt, for his part, did not find this strange. Ilda could not believe she had made such a silly face in front of him, but she was still happy to have spoken with him, as it was the first time they had seen each other in over 1,000 years. The 1,000-year age gap caught me by surprise. Back at the Atelier, a celebration party is taking place, but Kurt noticed that Hakuto was not even touching his food, so he approached to ask if something was wrong. Lee could not let Kurt discover that Hakuto was an illusion, but she also did not want him to continue seeing himself as just a simple helper. So she made Hakuto say that he was going on a journey to the royal capital, and while he was away, he was officially naming Kurt as the new master of the Atelier. As expected, Kurt did not think he deserved such a title, but everyone had already planned this, so they deceived him into thinking it was something common, and Kurt ended up accepting it. Do not forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and for those of you who stayed until the end, do not forget to comment the word millennium. A kiss from Bat Kun.